Jon rejoined his flagship the moment he linked up with the fleet returning from Bravos. He didn't waste time. "Captain, have every ship ready. We sail south at once. Pintos is next." Orders rippled across the decks. Artican sailors sprinted up rigging, hauled lines, and snapped sails open as the armada reshaped itself. Nearly the entire force turned south, but not all of it. 50 ships peeled away and headed north, heavy with their Bravosi hull, books, livestock, metalwork, hired hands, and the coin minister. His part in the southern voyage was finished. The remaining 450 ships held formation and drove on. Jon watched the split, satisfied, until he noticed Arya coming toward him with that sharp, unblinking stare of hers. "What is it?" he asked. Arya glanced back toward the rail. "Wind's upset. She wanted to go into Bravos." Jon followed her look. Wind, the child of the forest, stood apart. Not angry, just wounded in that quiet way that hit harder than shouting. He walked over and softened his voice. "Wind." She lifted her eyes. "Hello, Jon. I know you want to come with us," he said, keeping his tone steady, patient. "But it's not safe. Your kind hasn't been seen south of the wall for thousands of years. Most people don't even believe you exist. I'm not stopping you to be cruel. I'm stopping you so you don't end up hunted." Wind's fingers tightened around the edge of her cloak. "We'll explore more later," Jon added. "Well, I can protect you properly. Do you understand?" After a long moment, she nodded. Only then did Jon return to the main deck, where Arya was already moving again, practicing with Dark Sister. Her footwork was lighter than before, her hands quicker. "The man in Bravos," Jon said. "Did he teach you something useful?" Arya's grin flashed. "He said I can be faster. Like a cat." Jon's mouth twitched. "We'll see." He left her to it and headed below, passing the royal guards and entering his cabin. Inside, Ygritte was adjusting her dress. She turned, surprised to see him so soon. "You're here." "The voyage is long," Jon said, stepping close. "I wanted time with you." The rest of the world fell away behind a closed door, and the ship carried them south while their cabin lights stayed low. A week into the journey, the sea itself seemed to whisper their name. Merchants, pirates, and coast watchers spotted the horizon thick with sails and banners. Ravens lifted from towers and rookeries, carrying the same message farther and faster than any ship could. 500 Artican ships. Not the 150 the world had learned to fear, but an armada that could choke a coastline. In Winterfell, Ned Stark read the Raven twice, then a third time, his fingers tightening on the parchment as if it had teeth. The report mentioned Bravos, and more than that, it mentioned Jon. Ned's thoughts returned to their last meeting, to words unsaid and truths half-spoken, cut short by chaos in the very heart of Winterfell. He wrote back immediately, asking to meet. Not through ravens. Face to face. King's Landing received the same news, and the court reacted like a man waking to a knife at his throat. A council was called in haste. Robert was absent, drowned in drink and humiliation after his defeat at sea, and no one dared drag him into the room. So the others gathered. Jon Arryn's voice rose in disbelief. 500 ships? Varys nodded, calm as ever. Near enough. Nearly 3 times the number that left their lands a year ago. The room turned heavy. Some felt fear, others anger, a few envy, and one man sat smiling too little. Peter Baelish's new scar made it impossible for him to hide behind charm. It had turned him into something sharper, more brittle. Court whispers followed him like flies. He took it as fuel. He hated Jon Artica with a focus that bordered on devotion, and he had already begun feeding Catelyn letters. Warnings. Lies wrapped in concern. Seeds meant to sprout into panic. Cersei listened with a rigid face, but her fear leaked through the cracks. She had never forgotten the terror of the Red Keep skies, when even birds felt like weapons. How can this be possible? Pycelle demanded. So many ships beyond the wall? Thousands in Bravos saw their fleet beneath the Titan, Varys replied. This is not rumor. Cersei's voice tightened. Then what do we do? Varys looked at her without warmth. The men you sent north will not stop them. If this turns into war, they will die first. Jon Arryn forced himself to breathe. A treaty may be our only path. We cannot beat them at sea, and marching beyond the wall is madness. Perhaps a marriage. Tywin has suggested it before. Renly gave a soft chuckle. If you cannot defeat an enemy, join them. I will not marry my daughter to that savage, Cersei snapped, the words coming too fast. We should cut off the head. Hire a faceless man. Stannis's answer was cold and immediate. And pay for it with what? The crown's promises? Baelish leaned forward at last. We could still ask the House of Black and White for a price. Barristan's brows drew together. You would risk Bravos when we're already trying to calm the realm? Varys's smile was thin. Still, I'm sure Lord Baelish would be eager to learn the cost. Baelish's jaw clenched, anger flashing at the mockery, but he swallowed it. Vengeance mattered more than pride. I'll go, he said. In the coming days. Jon Arryn turned back to Varys. They're sailing south. They aren't coming into our waters. Not yet, Varys said. They're negotiating along the Essosi coast. Bravos was only the first. They signed large contracts, bought heavily, and sold more than the same goods they've been trading with Dorne and the Reach. What goods? Stannis asked. Food, Varys replied. In volume. Enough that Bravos may resell it elsewhere. That landed hard. Jon Arryn frowned. The Reach and the Riverlands will not like losing that leverage. Baelish seized the opening. It's worse than that. If the Articans become the sea's pantry, they'll grow rich fast. They'll have influence without ever needing to lift a sword. And then what reason would they have to accept marriage terms from us? Some in the room knew he was inflating the threat to suit himself. No one corrected him. Fear was useful when it pointed outward. Across the sea, in Pentos, Magister Illyrio Mopatis read the same reports and felt his stomach sour. 450 Artican ships were sailing this way. He couldn't shut the gates of Pentos against trade without making enemies of every other Magister. Worse, he couldn't allow the Articans to cross paths with the last Targaryens under his roof. Varys had warned him, keep them apart at any cost. At dinner, Viserys acted like a man already wearing a crown. They're coming, he said, bright-eyed with excitement. Those savages will serve me. A true dragon does not beg. Daenerys ate quietly, eyes lowered, flinching at every careless word her brother threw across the table like a whip. Viserys kept going, voice turning cruel as he spoke of handing her over, as if she were a coin to be spent. Daenerys's fingers trembled around her cup, fear tightening her throat. Illyrio listened, face still, mind racing. Viserys' mouth would get him killed. Possibly all of them. Later, Illyrio pulled him aside. Viserys, he said carefully, you should understand this. The Articans may not bend to you. They may kill you. Viserys laughed like it was an insult. I offer them something they can't refuse. Their king gets the right to a Targaryen. Even that Stark bastard should be grateful for the honor. Illyrio swallowed his frustration. Khal Drogo has already agreed to your proposal. You cannot offend him by changing course. I'd rather deal with the savage from the north than the savage from the desert, Viserys snapped. At least the northern one has ships, and smash the usurper. Illyrio pushed once more. They respect no crowns but their own. You are not safe with them. Viserys' eyes went hard. Watch your tongue. I am your king. He stormed out, fury leading him like a leash, already looking for someone weaker to take it out on. Outside the window, an owl sat motionless in the dark, listening to everything. Take 30 ships with us, Jon told the captain, voice flat and controlled. The rest stay offshore and hold position. The captain nodded quickly. Everyone on deck could feel it. Since morning, the king had been carrying anger like a storm cloud, quiet but dangerous. Men kept working, yet their eyes kept drifting to him. A few glanced at the queen, hoping she'd explain his mood, but Ygritte looked just as unsettled, as if she didn't know where the fury was coming from either. Jon left the captain and moved to the rail, staring out at the dark water with a hard, distant focus. Whispers spread anyway. Is he all right? One dwarf muttered while hauling rope. No idea. Another answered, keeping his hands moving. He looks like he's one word away from biting someone's head off. Maybe it's his stomach. The second dwarf snorted. If you're brave, go ask him. The first dwarf glanced at Jon, felt the chill in the air around him, and immediately looked away. Nope, I'm not dying today. Good. Work. 2 minutes passed. Maybe he needs a song, the first dwarf said again, suddenly inspired. I know a great one. It's about my beard and my lice. His partner stared at him like he'd gone mad. A massive shadow fell over them. Out of the way, the giant rumbled. The dwarves scrambled aside as the giant crossed the deck, each step thudding like a drumbeat. And then, as if the gods themselves wanted to test Jon's patience, Tormund Giantsbane swaggered up behind him. King, Tormund boomed, cheerful as ever. Let's drink. A good cup fixes everything. No, Jon said without turning. Not now, Tormund. Tormund chuckled and clapped a hand on Jon's shoulder. Come on. We drink, we laugh, we fight a little. Next time we wrestle, I'll put you on your back for sure. The deck went silent. Jon's hand snapped up, caught Tormund's wrist, and in one smooth motion threw him. Tormund's grin vanished as the world flipped. A heartbeat later, he hit the sea with a heavy splash. He sputtered, bobbing up, eyes wide, trying to find the ship's rail from below. Jon didn't even lean over. Get him out, he said, indifferent as stone. Men exhaled in relief and hurried to haul the wildling back aboard. From a distance, Arya watched with narrowed eyes. He's really angry, she murmured, her gaze shifting to Ygritte. What happened? Arya asked. Ygritte hesitated, then spoke quietly. Jon met someone in Planetos. Someone who disgusted him. She didn't say more until she crossed the deck and took Jon's arm, careful, like she was approaching a wounded animal that might bite. If you throw me into the sea, she began under her breath. I swear I wouldn't, Jon cut in calmly. You rarely annoy me. It sounded almost like a compliment, but his eyes stayed cold. Ygritte tightened her hold anyway. Jon, I know you're furious, but everyone feels it. You're scaring your own people. His jaw flexed. He's worse than I expected, Jon said, voice low, each word restrained. A violent fool with a crown in his head and madness behind his eyes. He treats his own sister like property. He beat her until she couldn't stand. She begged him to stop, and he kept going, laughing, blaming her for their mother's death like a child throwing stones. Ygritte's face hardened. Your uncle, she breathed, disgusted. Jon's mouth twisted, not quite a smile. And he calls us savages. He thinks I'll bow to him because he was born with a name. He walks through Planetos like it belongs to him, talks about using us, then tossing us away. Even spoke of handing his sister over like she was coin. Ygritte stared at him a moment, then said the simplest thing in the world. Then kill him. Jon didn't deny it. If he stands in front of me, he replied, voice quiet, I just might. Not long after, the fleet shifted. 30 ships broke away and headed for the Pentoshi coast, while the rest held farther out at sea like a waiting blade. Pentos noticed. The port bells rang. Guards hurried into formation. Extra patrols flooded the streets, shouting orders not to provoke the newcomers, not to start anything, not to die for pride. Inside the city, the magisters gathered in haste within one of the grand mansions. Illyrio Mopatis sat among them, heavy-faced and tense behind a practiced smile. Well, he said, it seems the Artican fleet has arrived in our waters. They cross from Bravos in a week, one magister muttered. That speed is madness. Madness or skill, another said. Either way, we welcome them. Respectfully, no one argued. Bravos had treated Jon Artica like a king, and Bravos had profited. Pentos would not be the city that tried arrogance and ended up burning like Old Town. We reinforced the city, a magister decided. No theft, no insults, no foolish heroics. And Illyrio, you speak for us. Illyrio nodded, satisfied for reasons he didn't share. If he led the negotiations, he could control what the Articans saw and who they met. A servant burst in, breathless. My lords, they've arrived. How many? Someone demanded. 30 ships, the servant said, leaving the main fleet offshore. Illyrio rose slowly. Then let us greet our honored guests. The Artican ships slid into the harbor like wolves into a pen. Jon disembarked first, armored and grim, flanked by guards. Behind him came his people, Ygritte, Arya, his minister, and the rest of his entourage. Illyrio stepped forward, arms open, voice smooth. "Welcome, King of Artica. An honor to receive you in Pentos after your successful dealings in Bravos. They say you even placed a fortune in the Iron Bank. Power and wealth together. Rare." Jon stared at him like a man staring at something rotten. "Thank you for Pentos' hospitality, Illyrio," Jon said. Illyrio blinked, a fraction too slow. "You know my name?" Jon's eyes didn't soften. "I know many things." For a heartbeat, Illyrio's confidence wavered. Then the traitor's mask returned. "Then we should negotiate quickly, my king. I must travel in the coming days. I wouldn't want to fail you as a host." Jon pointed past the crowds, toward the largest mansion near the sea. "That one is yours." Illyrio's smile tightened. "It is, but perhaps it won't suit your tastes. I had a more private place in mind." Jon's voice cooled further. "So, I'm not welcome in your home?" The other magisters stiffened immediately, displeased and confused. Illyrio saw it and corrected himself fast. "Of course you're welcome," he said, forced warmth in every syllable. "I meant no offense. If you wish it, we'll use my mansion." "Good," Jon replied. "Introductions, then." Formal names were exchanged, titles recited. Courtesy performed like a ritual. They walked through Pentos with guards and giants drawing stares from every street. When they reached the mansion's gates, Jon scanned the entrance once, sharp and searching. No sign of them. Illyrio gestured inward. "Your family can rest while we speak business." Jon nodded to Ygritte. "My love, go inside." "Arya, there's a courtyard. You'll want space." Arya frowned. This wasn't what she expected, but Jon didn't look at her long enough to argue. "Fine," she said, and turned away. The magisters and Jon's minister went deeper into the mansion with Jon. Ygritte remained by a sea-facing hall with guards and Artican women. Arya stayed outside, and then, as she practiced, a cat appeared. It meowed at her feet, bold as anything. Arya ignored it. The cat meowed again, louder, then trotted away and looked back like it was mocking her. "What do you want?" Arya muttered. The cat meowed, then slipped around a corner. Arya followed. One turn became two. Two became three. She didn't even notice she'd left the courtyard's safety until the air changed and the sea breeze hit her face. The cat led her to a quiet space near the water, hidden from the main halls. "I got you," Arya whispered, finally snatching it up. A sharp gasp sounded beside her. Arya spun. A young woman stood there, pale as moonlight, with silver hair and violet eyes. Valyrian. No mistaking it. But she wasn't shining the way songs promised. Even dressed in fine fabric, she moved like someone trying not to hurt. One eye was bruised, marks hid beneath makeup that had been rushed and imperfect. She flinched when she saw Arya, then tried to hide her face too late. "Who are you?" the girl demanded, voice trembling with urgency and shame. "What are you doing here?" Arya's grip on the cat loosened. She stared, stunned by the mismatch between beauty and fear. The girl swallowed hard, forcing strength into her voice even as it cracked. "Daenerys Targaryen," she said, like the name was both a shield and a curse. She glanced toward the mansion, terrified someone might hear. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, and her eyes flicked to the sea like she was searching for any escape at all. "If you want, I can also rewrite this again in a tighter web novel chapter style, shorter paragraphs, stronger hooks, and cleaner POV, or keep it detailed like this."
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Arya looked at the girl for a moment after hearing her question, before responding, but instead of saying who she was, she spoke about what had happened to this girl. "Who did this to you?" Arya looked at the girl strangely, feeling surprised. She didn't know why, but with this girl being practically an older Lyanna Artica, Arya immediately cared and became angry, almost thinking about what she would do if someone did this to the little Lyanna, the girl she had grown so attached to in the last few moons. She would even compete with Jon to see who would kill the perpetrator of this madness. This is nothing. The girl was hesitant and surprised by what seemed like strange concern from this girl, but she knew she couldn't say anything about it, and Daenerys continued. You haven't answered my question. Who are you and why are you here? No one should come here, and you don't seem to be a servant of Magister Illyrio, the Targaryen girl commented with a bit of caution. To Daenerys, this strange girl, despite being very beautiful, could very well be one of the assassins hired to kill her and her brother. After all, no one approached them so openly. Hey, calm down. Arya spoke again, looking strangely at the girl, who was clearly afraid. I can even smell your fear from here. Arya couldn't help but mock the scared girl a little, but she also couldn't blame her, since she apparently suffered mistreatment. What do you mean by smell? Daenerys asked, increasingly intrigued by the nonsensical phrases being spoken by this stranger. You may not know, Arya said with a tone of pride as soon as she had the opportunity to introduce herself properly. But what I said was literal. After all, I am a wolf. Arya complained, staring intently at the girl. This left the girl even more confused, but before she could ask what that meant, Arya's smile grew even wider. I am Arya Stark. My name says it all, she asserted. After all, Arya considered herself a fierce wolf. Upon hearing that name, the Valyrian girl immediately froze. Viserys had mentioned that he decided not to send her to the northern savages, opting instead to continue the deal with the Dothraki, which is why he was frustrated and took it out on her. Viserys repeatedly said that he couldn't trust the northern savage being a Stark bastard, and that he should kill him as soon as he had conquered the Seven Kingdoms with the Dothraki army. Even knowing that she wouldn't be sent to the northern savages anymore, she knew they had come to the city, and she ended up not going to the port out of curiosity due to her condition. When she heard that they were coming, she was immediately invited to stay hidden in her room, and a little frustrated with everything. She came here to try to calm her anxious heart. What she couldn't imagine was finding one of them here, especially someone like this girl, an enemy of her house, Stark. A Stark was the last thing she could have imagined, and she didn't know what to say as she looked at Arya, still a little paralyzed. She felt fear, confusion, anger, but what she couldn't help but feel the most was jealousy, because the girl seemed so happy and excited, a complete contrast if compared to her in her life. Despite being younger than Daenerys, Arya seemed happier, braver, and more beautiful than her, just by looking at the girl for a few seconds while still holding the cat. Meanwhile, she had to flee from assassins, obey her brother in everything, be mistreated, and even be sacrificed like a breeding animal for him to get his army. She couldn't even express what she felt. Not that she could blame Arya for her family winning the war against the Targaryens and her having to flee when she was just a newborn from Dragonstone and live the rest of her life running. Hey, what's wrong with you? Arya suddenly spoke in a harsh tone. Jon would disagree if he saw me talking to someone like this, she thought, but she couldn't help but look strangely at the girl, who seemed more and more defeated after she introduced herself. Daenerys finally emerged from her depressive state and looked at her cautiously. Sorry about that. I'm just a bit unwell since I woke up, Daenerys made an excuse. You're not going to tell me who did this to you? Arya still insisted. No, Daenerys replied with a firm tone. Arya simply sighed. All right, and you haven't introduced yourself yet. Who are you? Arya asked. Daenerys seemed to hesitate for a moment, not knowing what to say, but one thing was certain. She couldn't reveal her identity. As she tried to meet the eyes of the girl in front of her and come up with any excuse, Arya took the initiative, growing a bit frustrated with the girl's hesitation. You're definitely a descendant of Valyria, aren't you? She asked. After all, this appearance wasn't exclusive to the Targaryens, so Arya associated her with being one of them. You must have come from the southern cities, like Volantis and Lys, where your genetics have been passed down to people in those regions over the centuries, she said. Yes, Daenerys responded with a little more confidence, seeing that the girl had given her a way out. I'm from Volantis, Daenerys finally replied. My name is... She almost hesitated. Victoria, just Victoria, Daenerys said, recalling the story Ser Willemdare used to tell them when they were children, before he died and left them in Bravos. I see, Victoria, Arya murmured as she looked at the girl, not asking anything more. Arya still held the cat in her arms, which now seemed calm, as if it were listening to their conversation. Arya took her first look at the sea behind Daenerys and couldn't help but be surprised. "This place seems to be beautiful," she commented as she gazed at the open space, seeing various corals and a large reef scattered throughout the crystal-clear water of that side of the shore. "Yes, I come here when I like to think," Daenerys replied, while Arya, taking the initiative, passed by her and moved forward to look at the sea excitedly. "It really is very nice, but I've seen more beautiful places," Arya said in the end with a slightly bold tone. It was at that moment that Daenerys looked Arya up and down, seeing beyond her beauty something more. The girl, besides displaying a beauty above any other woman she had ever seen, dressed well with a skirt adorned with medals, something she had never seen before, while also carrying a sword. Moreover, she spoke confidently, despite being quite audacious and bold in Daenerys' first impression. She had to admit that the girl knew how to converse and mastered the common tongue very well. Being the first Artican Daenerys had spoken to, this one was nothing like she had imagined, as she had expected savages dressed in leather to protect themselves from the snow, as her brother had said. "You carry a sword? Wait, I recognize that sword." Daenerys couldn't help but be surprised when she saw the symbol on the sword's hilt. "Is that a replica? Or is it the real one?" She stopped trembling as she asked this. After all, her brother used to read to her about their family from Sir Willemdary's books. Oh, that is Dark Sister. Of course it's real," Arya said, confused at first but soon opened a proud smile as she drew the blade slightly from its sheath, showing the bright, magical metal to Daenerys, who looked stunned and, in a way, enchanted by seeing something she never imagined. One of her family's legendary swords now in the hands of Stark. Suddenly, the cat in Arya's arms meowed and began to struggle. With no other choice, Arya, with one hand on the sword and the other on the cat, released the feline, which began to walk toward Daenerys as if to comfort her, rubbing its body against her legs. Daenerys was surprised and approached, picking up the cat, which started purring in her arms, seemingly enjoying her touch. She couldn't help but smile at that, feeling calmer. "He seems to like you," Arya murmured in the end. "Yes." Daenerys nodded as she petted the cat. Arya began to sheath her sword, but noticed something on it. "Wait, why is your sword marked?" Daenerys couldn't help but exclaim, surprised, and then she became embarrassed by her outburst, lowering her head as the cat meowed in her lap. Arya suddenly started laughing at the girl's reaction, finding it quite amusing before deciding to respond. "Look, there are several names on this sword. The name of one of my favorite heroines, Visenya Targaryen, is at the top." She spoke with a proud tone, showing the name engraved on the Valyrian steel, which was now being used by her almost 300 years later. "You know her?" Daenerys couldn't help but be surprised. "Yes, Victoria. I'm a big fan of the Dragon Rider. She wielded this blade while riding her dragon, Vhagar, and conquered the 7 kingdoms with her 2 brothers, Aegon and Rhaenys," Arya responded, then pointed to another famous name. "Here, this name is Daemon Targaryen, who wielded this blade during the Dance of the Dragons." After that, Arya showed the next name. Brynden Rivers also used it, fighting against the Blackfyres about 100 years ago. She seemed excited with every name she mentioned on the sword. "The Blackfyres 100 years ago," Daenerys murmured, feeling enchanted by each name being mentioned. Even though the last one was a bastard, he still fought against the Blackfyres on behalf of his brother after their father, known as Aegon the Unworthy, had left Westeros in chaos, and the legitimized bastards of House Blackfyre tried to take the throne. But the names didn't stop there, as Daenerys was surprised by the next one. "The next is Jon Artica, the most skilled man alive in this era," Arya responded proudly. Daenerys was a bit surprised by this, since her brother wanted her to marry this man, the leader of the people he called savages. "I've heard many things about what he's done in Westeros," Daenerys finally spoke. "Yes, Jon faced the Red Viper, Jaime Lannister, the Mountain, Barristan Selmy, all warriors known throughout the realm. He faced a few more, but none of them were as famous as these last ones." and Jon simply defeated all of them with ease. There's no one in this world who can beat him. Arya responded with a smile. Not even the king was enough to stop him, and he used this sword to do it all. And now it's in my hand. I hope to be worthy of it, just like my predecessors, Arya said, showing the last name engraved on the sword. Her own. Can you tell me what Artica is like? Daenerys, in the end, took the initiative to ask, thinking it was a wild place. But seeing this girl in front of her, she couldn't help but wonder if she was mistaken about her brother's tales while she kept the cat cuddled in her arms, with it purring passively at her touch. For some reason, she didn't mind it. Well, since you want to know about Artica, I'll tell you a bit about what we can find there, Arya said as she sheathed the sword and opened a big smile, excited to start talking about her life in her home, as there was nothing more thrilling for her than talking about Jon Artica's kingdom. While the girls conversed, Daenerys began listening to Arya, sharing some details about Artica. Of course, nothing too significant, but she talked about how beautiful the place was and that, despite being beyond the wall and having received many tribes from the north, the new inhabitants quickly adapted and started to receive formal education. Meanwhile, Jon was still in a meeting with all the magistrates, while Illyrio spoke and expressed his opinions on various goods, trying to secure a better contract. But Jon was firm and didn't allow any of them to get different conditions from the other cities he had already negotiated with. The men from Artica were waiting in the courtyard, while the royal guards didn't follow Arya, because Jon had asked them not to, only keeping watch over her through wars. Jon wanted Arya to stay there, talking with her aunt, who was easily considered a sweet and easygoing person. She was a somewhat downtrodden, shy, and sad girl, which was no surprise given her difficult life. Knowing that she must have been frustrated after learning that her family was destroyed and having to flee from murderous pursuers, even a violent brother who took out everything that had happened on her and wouldn't hesitate to turn her into a prostitute just to satisfy his desires to take the Iron Throne. Not only that, but it also seemed that she was involved in schemes with those she seemed to trust. However, Jon noticed how Illyrio strangely acted against him, which made Jon realize that this man had contact with Varys, and they talked constantly after the raven he anticipated yesterday. They maintained a coded conversation, and Jon was trying to decipher some of it. It was strange that they mentioned someone in particular who was in the desert of Essos at this moment. He would try to look into it later. For now, he kept control of the cat, trying to comfort the girl, issuing commands to the feline to do everything possible to treat the girl well while caressing her arm the entire time. Meanwhile, elsewhere there was a man drinking alone in his room, emptying his fourth bottle that afternoon. He was drunk and frustrated, cursing anyone he could, even Jon, his uncle Ned Stark, and King Robert, who were the source of his anger. This was none other than Viserys Targaryen, his other uncle, more mad than the Sea Lord had described. Jon considered him one of the worst possible people, wondering how a madman could have been born without even being poisoned by the maesters, as happened to his father. Although Jon didn't excuse his actions, there was still some blame in the poisons the maesters gave him. Time began to pass, and 2 hours had gone by when the negotiation finally ended. King Jon Artica, I am very pleased that we were able to reach an agreement. It's a shame we can't negotiate more at this time, but I'm sure that if you want to discuss the wood and grain you're supplying to Bravos, Pintos will be very satisfied, said Illyrio, trying to get rid of Jon as quickly as possible, even though these items were not even part of the negotiation. Understand. Very well, then we'll leave now. I'll go to my men, Jon said in the end, while Illyrio nodded. After greeting everyone, Jon went ahead with his guard until he was finally led outside. But when Illyrio went to escort him to the port, he saw only the royal guards, with no sign of the king, who maintained a calm look, almost laughing at Illyrio's confusion. Where is the king of Artica? Illyrio asked, clearly confused. He went to fetch his sister, then went ahead, the royal guard replied. Illyrio felt a bit suspicious and frustrated, not wanting Jon to meet the Articans in any way. He had even locked Viserys with several bottles of wine for him to drink, and when he tried to open the door, he would excuse it by saying he was too drunk to even open it. After all, Illyrio had locked it and did the same with his sister to ensure it. But Daenerys knew a way from her room to escape and go to that corner where she found Arya. The conversation between Daenerys and Arya had finally come to an end after Arya had shared some things, like her training to become a warrior. Of course, she avoided mentioning details about Jon's power and how he had shaped Artica from scratch, the Grand Weirwood, the Children of the Forest, the White Walkers, and Jon's dragons. I see. Daenerys couldn't help but feel very enchanted by what she heard. She had never met anyone from her city who could talk so openly, and despite Arya being a few years younger and a Stark, she had to admit that the girl had cheered her up a bit. She felt much better while keeping the cat in her lap the entire time. Arya had heard that the fields of Artica were blooming, filled with grains, fruits, and vegetables, while the people lived warm, well-fed, and even being educated. Daenerys couldn't help but think that she might have jumped to conclusions after hearing this, believing the words of the girl in front of her, who didn't seem to be lying. Artica didn't seem to be the wild place her brother always propagated, but she was still curious in general, whether about the kingdom or even the king, whom Arya spoke of as someone incredible, the person she admired most in the entire world. And, as if called by fate, footsteps began to be heard in the corridor, and Daenerys became a bit frightened, thinking it might be her brother, who might try to attack Arya, especially upon seeing that she possessed such a well-known sword. He would certainly go mad. But as the person appeared in the doorway, it was none other than Jon Artica himself, wearing his Elden metal armor and his swords at his waist. "Jon!" Arya exclaimed as he entered the room alone, after telling his guards that he would do just that, passing by any sentry in the mansion without being caught. "Arya, I came to get you," Jon said calmly as he approached. "Yes, Jon, look, I met this girl. She is Victoria. She comes from the region of Volantis." Arya began to explain innocently, with Daenerys maintaining her lie, although the Targaryen now felt guilty about it, already considering Arya a good companion, perhaps even a friend at that moment, while Jon smiled at this. Arya wasted no time and continued speaking. "She looks so much like Lyanna. Will your daughter be like her, Jon?" Arya exclaimed further. Although Daenerys was a bit confused by the mention that she resembled this Lyanna, and was stunned when Arya mentioned that she was the daughter of the Artican king, she felt that Arya seemed very excited to meet her, speaking in such a friendly tone despite their vastly different lives. Jon nodded, looking at the girl who was staring at him the entire time. Daenerys, upon seeing him, didn't even know what to say as she continued to gaze at Jon. He sighed and stepped closer, noticing all of Daenerys' injuries, and Jon couldn't help but feel even angrier now that he saw them in person. Daenerys remained frozen, seeing Jon Artica for the first time. Suddenly, she remembered her current appearance and was not at all proud to show such wounds, immediately lowering her head in shame, not wanting to seem like an unattractive woman. Arya curiously looked at her newfound acquaintance, and Jon continued to approach, raising his hand to Arya, indicating that she shouldn't say anything as he stood in front of the girl, who seemed to tremble slightly with nerves. Daenerys was surprised as Jon simply appeared before her and gently held her chin, lifting it so that she would look directly at him. Unable to say anything, she just stared at him with her violet eyes while he studied her. "Why are you doing this?" was all she could manage to say, her voice faltering under the gaze of those strangely bright and firm eyes of someone in Jon's position. Jon might have been many things, but he wasn't the savage she had imagined. He dressed like a knight, maintained a serious face and confident steps. He was also a man she couldn't help but internally remark as handsome, more so than her brother or any other man she had ever seen. This held her gaze, even with the shame of her depressed, beaten, and dejected appearance. Her heart felt a bit chaotic and confused while Jon, not looking at her with disdain, had a strangely gentle touch as he studied her wounds. Even Arya, who was standing beside them, was confused by Jon showing such care for a stranger, making her think that he might see his own daughter in the girl, just as she had. "Your wounds look bad, but they are only superficial. Your brother hasn't caused you any permanent harm," Jon said calmly, while Daenerys felt shaken upon hearing this. She felt the ground slip from beneath her at those words. After all, it was an indication that Jon knew who she was and what had happened. Jon sighed and took something from a small pouch he carried, which contained his documents, contracts, and a jar of special ointment made by the children of the forest, something that could be considered magical. Take this and use it for a few days. You'll be fine quickly, Jon said as the cat finally left Daenerys' arms. He held the ointment in front of her and placed some into Daenerys' hands with his free hand, maintaining a gentleness that only a man would show when seeing a relative suffer unjustly, especially at the hands of their own blood. You'll be fine after this, Jon said, still looking at her. Let's go, Arya. Jon turned to Arya, who still felt a bit confused by everything and by the attention Jon was giving to that strange girl, as if he knew her. You can wait for me at the entrance, Jon requested, and Arya nodded, a little hesitant. Arya began to move, while Jon leaned down once more toward Daenerys, intending to say something without anyone else hearing, while Daenerys barely uttered a word since he had made her look at him. Listen, you'll be fine after this. And one more thing, if you want to leave, I can take you away from your brother's grasp, and even from Illyrio, who is plotting to have you killed or to give you a very unpleasant fate alongside your brother. That's why I'm willing to take you away from here, but I don't want to do it by force. You have to decide. But I promise you that I will give you a much better life, where you won't have to worry about assassins, shelter, or food, and you'll have the luxury of living like a true princess in Artica, he said, looking at the girl, who was staring at him as if he were delirious or as if she couldn't understand or absorb everything she was hearing from Jon. But he continued, after all, you're not the only Targaryen alive beside your brother. The Targaryen bloodline still lives, and not all of Rhaegar's children are dead. Rhaenys is alive, and your older brother has another living child as well, Jon said calmly, while Daenerys just looked at him with wide, distrustful eyes, as if he were lying. Your brother was never the true heir to the Iron Throne, and even if he gathers an army here in Essos, he will never be able to cross the sea or conquer Westeros with a bunch of Dothraki. That's why I'm inviting you to come to Artica. I'll be waiting for your answer, Daenerys Targaryen. I hope you make your decision, because if you do, I swear by all my gods that I will give you a much better life than you've ever had, Jon said, and quickly turned away, leaving the girl there, paralyzed, still holding the ointment he had placed in her fingers as Jon disappeared down the corridor. Let's go. We have nothing left to do here, Jon informed his men as he approached them. Yes, my king. Did you hear, men? We are returning to the ship at the port. The Artican men quickly started issuing orders as they began to move. Soon, the Artican troops began moving towards the gate. Meanwhile, Magister Illyrio approached Jon, starting to leave with his royal guards. Illyrio approached, bowing his head in a sign of respect. Artican king, it seems we shall leave the rest to be negotiated next time we meet. He spoke calmly as Jon nodded, maintaining a watchful eye on the man who seemed full of schemes. Jon did not want to act openly against him. After all, he first wanted to understand what this man was hiding and how he would deal with the Targaryens. So, Jon just nodded and let him go as he began to retrace his path through Planetos to the main port. Daenerys still stood in the same spot after hearing all this, wondering what it all meant as she found herself there, not realizing how much time had passed. She shook herself and quickly looked at her hands, where there was the ointment that Jon had handed her, and also a letter. She thought about it for a couple of seconds before tucking the letter between her breasts to not lose it, realizing she could not stay there any longer. She began to return to her room, then took her secret path. It didn't take long to pass through the corridors, dodging the guards, until she finally reached her room through a false wall she had discovered some time ago. Illyrio seemed to keep these in his house in the rooms for some emergency cases. After closing the passage, she couldn't help but be curious and looked out the window. But no more Articans were present at the mansion. She just sighed and moved away from the window and sat on the bed while opening the glass jar with the strange cream, which she received from Jon, who said it would help her with her wounds. She couldn't help but wonder whether she should trust this person or not. I don't know him. What reasons would he have to help me? She murmured somewhat conflictedly. After all, on one hand, Jon Artica should be a stranger to her, and she to him, even an enemy of her family. But on the other hand, it was odd how he treated her, as he was nothing like she imagined. There was nothing wild as she expected. His touch was warm, warmer than any person she had ever touched. Yet, it was a pleasant warmth. Thinking about this, she saw no reason to distrust him, despite finding his behavior towards her very strange. He did not have disdain in his current appearance, but rather a gentle look, almost concerned about her. Then, she began to take the ointment from the jar and apply it to her face. The contact with the substance made her feel a bit of cold on her skin, but quickly, with a slight tingling, the rashes and pain she still felt began to be relieved. Seeing this, she took more ointment and applied it to all her wounds. Quickly, she felt relief in her silent suffering, and her purple eyes looked with some admiration at this jar. Closing it and quickly placing it on the table, she lay down on the bed at this moment while her eyes stared at the ceiling, thinking about what she should do, going back to thinking about Jon's words to her. "I and Viserys are not the only Targaryens," she asked herself internally, confused about what she had heard. Why did he tell me this? Why did he help me? Who is he? She wondered all the time without understanding yet, but also thought about why he did it when he simply left after saying something like that to her. She then touched her clothing and, taking the letter hidden in her bosom, opened it carefully while observing the handwriting of the Arctic King. She was momentarily distracted by his good writing, but her focus returned to the letter. "I know it must be hard to understand why I gave you this letter, but it needed to be done. After all, I wanted you to know about your family. Since there are so many Targaryens out there that you and your brother aren't even aware of, the family still lives, and I want to help you, Aunt." Daenerys paused at this part as her eyes trembled with that last word, wondering if he was really addressing her, perhaps in error, but after staring at the same word for 2 minutes, she couldn't say that he was mistaken, so with still shaken eyes, she moved on to the next word. "I know it's hard to understand, but I am your nephew, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna. I have their marriage certificate, which proves that I am their legitimate son. It was a shock to me when I learned the truth. After all, the document was inside a book I had looted from the Citadel. After finally knowing who my mother was, I didn't know what to think, but in the end, I'm still Jon Artica, the name I was not born with or given, but something I built for myself in this world." She read this paragraph, not knowing what to comment, as she read on to the next part. "However, I cannot say that I am the only Targaryen alive besides you. Aemon Targaryen, the third son of King Mikar, He had served as a maester to the Night's Watch for decades, where I supplied him with provisions for the patrol. He has been in Artica since then, helping me build our nation. He has always been a smart and kind person. He even joined the Night's Watch to not instigate a crisis in the kingdom with the succession of his brother King Aegon V. Targaryen. I had a right to the line of succession, but he sacrificed going to the farthest point of Westeros so as not to see his family caught in another crisis after so many others. He is the man who did everything for the family and told me many times how. Agonizing it was to hear the news from the south during the Baratheon rebellion. He always asked me to look for them, pleading that I help, even before knowing that we shared the same blood. Jon had written every one of the words he lived in recent years. Aemon never abandoned his family, and Jon could not say that for him. That was what mattered most, even if he had to sacrifice himself. He was glad that he was his family too. Daenerys was surprised with every line, not imagining that this man was in the Night's Watch and now. In Artica, if she was not mistaken in the line of succession she learned from her family, then this must be her father's oldest uncle, making him her great-uncle. First the Arctic King, then this Aemon. Daenerys could hardly believe what she was learning there. We are not the only Targaryens in the world then. She couldn't help but embrace the letter with some force, part of her wanting to believe the words that she and Viserys were not alone. She sighed a little, letting some tears escape from her eyes containing all her hope, before placing the letter in front of her and continuing to read. Even though a part of her said that this was very strange and sudden, she did not have a very healthy life when her fate is to be handed over to whoever can provide the best army for her brother, no matter how she would be treated. Of course, any contact with another reality might give her the desire to escape from this, especially with a stranger claiming to be her nephew after treating her more kindly than anyone else had ever done without trying to gain anything in return. After all, people only acted like that to try to gain her brother's favor, who was often disappointed with his explosive behavior. Returning to reading, she sighed deeply. After all, Jon had not mentioned Aemon, but rather 2 sons of his deceased older brother. And there's her, someone I met in Dorne. I admit I was enchanted by her beauty. I didn't know at the time that we were siblings, but it seemed we had some kind of connection. But it wasn't hard to find out who this woman was. After all, she is my sister, legitimate daughter of Rhaegar and Elia of House Martell. What I most wanted at that moment was to have gone back in time while I was in Dorne and embraced her as my blood, but that will be done soon. After all, you're not the only Targaryen I need to find here, Aunt. I sent my men to Dorne on a secret mission, aiming to fetch her after sending a similar letter to what I did with you. She read while once again becoming stunned. If this is true, then Viserys has no right to the Iron Throne just by birthright. Daenerys could not help but comment, thinking about how violent and uncontrollable Viserys would become upon learning this, saying it was a lie and taking it out on her as he always did. Thinking about this made her tremble immediately with fear of her brother. She sighed after calming down a bit before continuing the letter. That's why I say, your brother will never have a right to the throne with 2 heirs above him. And from what I've already seen of him, he is not worthy of being a good king. Perhaps even worse than your father, and all in Westeros will see this. He will not have the support of any kingdom that thinks rationally, and try and put Dothrakis against the 7 kingdoms is a lost fight. After all, Westeros can gather more than 200 or even 300,000 men to fight by combining all the 7 kingdoms, not to mention that the Dothrakis may be skilled with a horse, but they have never faced a cavalry with armor and spears in the desert, or even a siege, as they would have to do in thousands of castles if they wanted to gain territories. Jon had written his thoughts on his brother's plan, while Daenerys had not thought much about war and was not even educated to understand this. But she ended up agreeing with Jon's logic. That is why I'm going to end this letter with a question, which I probably already asked you when I delivered it, if I did so. He wrote in the last lines, not being absolutely sure that he would find her, as otherwise a raven would be delivering it to her window. Then the letter continued. You don't deserve this life, Daenerys Targaryen. You are my blood, my family, and I want to take you out of this place. This life before it's too late, and give you a life as you deserve in Artica with your family and away from the madness of your brother. I'm trying to leave the decision with you after all. I don't want to kidnap you and scare you with this. That's why I ask as your nephew that you accept my help. And I say this because I don't want your brother in my way. I've already noticed he's an ambitious madman and will drag you down with him. I know you are a smart girl. You know that your brother will not be able to reach the throne with other members of your family alive, and neither I nor Aemon want this for you. It's time for you to live as a true Targaryen and not running from assassins or being a disposable chess piece for people around you. You will always be welcome in Artica as my blood and will live in the glory that the ancient Valyrians had in Valyria. I will appear again and hope to hear your answer, but remember, I will not accept your brother either. Daenerys finally finished reading the letter and didn't know what to say. This was a chance for her to escape. Despite not knowing anything about Jon, or even if he was telling the truth or not, she couldn't say she wasn't seduced by the idea of fleeing with the Articans. Arya Stark, whom she had met, seemed like a strong, mature, and cheerful girl, someone she was far from being, even earning Daenerys' admiration for how she wished she could be. After all, she was a shy and sad girl, longing for and desiring a home she had never seen, just hoping that one day she could stop running and live peacefully, even if it meant giving up the throne. All she wanted was a place she could call home. What do I do? She murmured as she read the last part of the letter, which told her not to show the letter to anyone. After all, Jon did not want to put her in danger because of it and would have to invade Planetos if it was read by others, not wanting to expose his real paternity yet. He even had a bird at her window just to ensure it would not be read by anyone. On impulse, she simply nodded in agreement, knowing there was a lot of shocking information and her brother certainly would not accept it amicably, and she would directly suffer his wrath. It was at that moment that she stored the letter away when the door opened at that moment, with a servant bringing her food. Here, she simply said as she placed the plate on the table. Daenerys ate in silence, with darkness taking the place of the day. A few hours later, She spent the night not reading some books as she used to. After all, she wasn't in the mood for it. She just applied some more of the ointment John had given her, feeling much better. She lay down in bed and was thoughtful about what she had learned that night, trying to decide what to do next. And as she lay there, the hours passed, and she finally fell asleep thinking about it all. That night, Daenerys had a dream unlike any she had had in her life. She saw herself at a very high altitude as the wind hit against her, not knowing where she was and how high she was at that moment, even having some difficulty breathing in that atmosphere. Before looking for an answer, her gaze fell downward, seeing where she was a strange structure, a kind of platform made of stones, in a way she had never seen before, all clean and well built with pillars. Around, despite this, the whole space was open, and she did not know what she was doing there. The wind hit her face, forcing her to lean forward, trying to reach the edge of that platform to understand where she was. It was then that she reached the edge, carefully not to fall, startled by the height she was at. Even seeing clouds below it, down below, there was a pasture with kilometers of extension, while it had all kinds of plantations she did not understand coloring the space. Nearby, there was a large river being extended in a straight line, looking almost artificial. After all, she knew that rivers do not follow a straight line. Following the river to one of the edges, her eyes opened astonished to see a huge city below the point where she was. There was a massive tree in the middle of it covering a large part of the city, which must have been at least 300 meters tall, making her realize that she was on a platform more than 1,000 meters high, turning her attention to the giant tree, with red leaves that reflected a blood red under the sun. Her gaze went to the horizon as she saw the place surrounded by frozen mountains, which was strange as this place was green. There was life in abundance. It was magical for Daenerys. "Where am I?" she murmured. At that moment, she heard a sound of very strong wind beating, and as she looked down, a huge shadow emerged, coming from below. She startled, screaming and falling backwards to the ground as her face turned towards the creature flapping its wings and moving towards the platforms above her, while emitting a loud growl. It was at least 30 meters in length, with its enormous wings generating even stronger winds, disappearing above her, and she realized she was on a kind of structure full of platforms. "This can't be real," she murmured, watching the creature disappear into other platforms, trying to believe that it could be real, that it was actually real, that she was seeing a real dragon. "Mommy, Mommy, let's see the ancient dragon." Suddenly, she heard the voice of a boy exclaiming joyfully behind her. Looking to the side, she awkwardly got up, seeing the boy running as he entered this platform from a staircase in a corner, with the boy jumping while looking back. From the staircase, other people began to appear. 2 other children also emerged. The boy in front should be about 8 years old, and the 2 children, one 6 and another girl 4. The last one walked awkwardly, having her little arm held by a woman whom Daenerys looked at with even more shocked eyes, seeing someone with white hair and purple eyes like hers, but a few years older and extremely beautiful, more beautiful than any woman Daenerys had ever seen, wondering if her mother was like this in her youth. "Be careful," the woman said sternly to the boy. "But Mom, let's go. I want to see the ancient dragon." "I love hearing its stories." The boy jumped and shouted joyfully. "Even so, it's dangerous to walk like that in the Temple of the Dragons. I'm sure you've heard this several times from your father, when he used to come here with you to ride." She continued talking, as the boy finally seemed to calm down a bit. "Okay, sorry about that," he said, still anxious, but appeared embarrassed by his behavior. "Mommy, isn't Daddy home today?" The woman continued walking towards the next staircase that advanced to the next platform, while the girl asked about the supposed father at her side with a curious tone. "No, your father went to the south today. He had some things to sort out in Winterfell, but he'll be back tonight to have dinner with you and your siblings." The woman spoke with a sweet tone to her daughter. The young Daenerys stood frozen, watching them start to walk to the next platform, with the boy in front beginning to behave better as he waited for his mother and siblings. But suddenly, the older woman stopped. "What's wrong, Mommy?" Both children in her arms looked at her. Daenerys was there watching while nobody seemed to pay attention to her until now, as if she were invisible. But then the older woman opened a slight, closed smile. "Let's do this," she began. "You can go ahead and wait for me on the next platform. But be careful with the edges, understood? Falling from here is dangerous, and there won't be any dragons to save you in free fall." She made it very clear. The children, although confused by their mother's attitude, nodded in the end, starting to move away, heading towards the stairs and climbing them while the older brother helped the other two siblings. Daenerys was still paralyzed, wondering what that woman was doing there. But as soon as she looked back at her, she found the woman staring at her with intense eyes and maintaining the same smile. "You." Daenerys immediately knew that was her as soon as their eyes connected, a future version of herself, never imagining that something like this was possible. Both stared at each other, with the younger version cautious and frightened, while the older one just maintained the smile until she decided to break the silence. "You have a choice, Daenerys. Remember that when the time comes. Your future has two extremities, so know very well what to choose," she said, and the next moment, the whole place began to blur, and Daenerys found herself back in her bed, waking up sweaty and frightened, not understanding what had just happened. Daenerys was forced to rise from her bed and search for some handkerchiefs on top of her desk, swiftly wiping her sweaty face before the servants arrived with her first meal of the day. She was still pondering the dream she had just experienced. She questioned whether what she had seen was truly a figment of her imagination. She recalled the children, all bearing Targaryen-like features, even though the most restless boy, the eldest of the three, had dark hair but still eyes identical to hers. She could not help but be enchanted by the memory of that dream. Although it was just a dream, it felt so real that it almost seemed like her own fantasy. After cleaning up, she looked out the window to see the morning sun. The Articans had already left, but now she felt a slight emptiness thinking about the Artican king and how he had left, leaving her speechless without a chance for her to speak or question him. Her thoughts were interrupted as the door opened, and a servant of Illyrio entered, not with her meal as she imagined. "Daenerys, your presence is summoned in the main hall to have breakfast with your brother and Magister Illyrio," she said. Daenerys simply nodded, changing into something more presentable. Upon arriving at the location, she was surprised to find her brother laughing animatedly at one side of the table. He seemed to have been conversing with Magister Illyrio for some time. Her brother had dark circles under his eyes, indicating that he had spent the entire night drinking, as he sometimes did. However, unlike other times, his mood was not as usual, stressed and grumpy. But now, he was laughing energetically. Daenerys cautiously approached her brother, who quickly noticed her presence and raised his arm. "Good morning, my dear Dany. Come, join us," he said, quite excited. Daenerys could not fathom the reason for the occasion and his mood. She sat down calmly at the table, unsure of what to ask. "Dany," Viserys continued, before she could inquire about anything. "Illyrio spoke to me about advancing your marriage," he said, and Daenerys immediately froze in place upon hearing this. "What do you mean?" she murmured timidly. "Illyrio said that a powerful call has been rising greatly in recent years. He calls him Khal Drogo. He has over 100,000 men under his command and is ready to help me by putting all his warriors to conquer Westeros. He'll give me a golden crown in exchange for handing you over to him. Isn't that fantastic, sister? 100,000 men fighting for me. The Seven Kingdoms will be crushed," he exclaimed, showing why he was in a good mood. Looking like a psychopath, expecting Daenerys to also be happy for him, while she would be treated like a prostitute and a trading tool. This left Daenerys paralyzed. Even if he gets the army, and they can cross the sea, which I don't believe all the Dothraki together could fight against the Seven Kingdoms. The Dothraki are great warriors for shooting from horseback and for open field battles in the desert, but they are still unprotected. Fighting against cavalry with thousands of men with spears and armor like the soldiers of Westeros would be devastating for them, who do not even wear armor to protect themselves. Moreover, they are not prepared for long sieges in the great castles of Westeros. Such an army would be decimated, since the Seven Kingdoms could still gather more than 200 or even 300,000 men. And no one will want a brother on the throne. He reminds too much of their father, and he has already fallen once. These thoughts began to echo in Daenerys' head. Despite her brother's words, they did not match what she had heard from the green-eyed Artican. She always heard from her father that he was a great man and a king everyone admired. According to her brother, their family only fell because their father was betrayed by his own subjects. But she also couldn't help thinking logically. After all, if he really was a good king, why did no one come looking for us? Why did she always have to flee and never saw anyone from Westeros offering her help? Again, Jon's words contradicted this, referring to the king, her father, as a bad king, even calling him the Mad King. Daenerys began to plant this doubt in her mind as she thought about it. This also reminded her somewhat of that night, not only because of those children and that woman, but also about that city, wondering where such beauty came from, which she had never seen in any other place with that giant tree. Arya hadn't mentioned a tree in Artica, but she did mention that the place was very beautiful, full of pastures, as she saw. Daenerys wondered if that was really Artica from where the northern group came. "Mommy, let's go see the ancient dragon." The boy's voice emerged in her mind, which made her shudder a bit. "Dany," she suddenly heard a voice. Viserys was looking at her intently, making her feel uncomfortable. "Yes," she murmured timidly. "I'm trying to talk to you, but you seem to be in another world. Are you not happy that you can serve our house?" He said, and she, out of fear, just nodded. "I am happy that I can be useful," she murmured, although her body language showed nothing but the fear she tried to hide. "Good. Anyway, think about packing your things in your suitcase when you get to your room. After all, we are leaving Planetos today," he said, making Daenerys look stunned. "What do you mean, brother?" she murmured, disbelieving what she was hearing. "Illyrio has moved up your wedding. The sooner I get my army, the sooner I will have the throne. So, I want you to take the best clothes and the shortest ones that show off your body, and put them in your suitcase to seduce Khal Drogo because we're leaving for the desert," he said, returning to his smile. Daenerys just lowered her head, returning to her food. She was quite disturbed by all of this, with so many things happening at once shortly after being beaten. She just stayed silent, lost in her thoughts, while Viserys continued laughing and talking with Illyrio, as if he had made the deal of the century. Thus, time passed while she barely ate. Soon she was called by a servant. "You have to go back to your room," she said in a harsh tone. Daenerys was already used to dealing with some people who treated her with certain disdain in the house. The servant knew she would not be punished if it was not extreme, so there was no reason to sympathize with her and watch her go to her room like a lifeless doll. "So it is," she murmured, entering the room as she began to pick up the clothes. She knew that if she did not do it, the situation would get much worse, and she could do nothing but accept her fate being chosen by someone else. She picked up her ointment, the only thing there that could relieve her pains and bruises a little, though it did not seem to help in her situation. It was all she had. Her wounds had already improved, and her brother said that by the time she met Khal Drogo, she would be much better after traveling for a long time in the desert. So, she simply put everything in the suitcase and left the room. The horses and luggage for the journey were already ready, waiting for them for a journey that could last months in the desert. Daenerys found all this very sudden and looked at Illyrio, wondering if he really was who he seemed to be, according to Jon's words, that they were being used and that he wanted to get rid of them. Sighing, she headed to the wagon as soon as her brother called her. As they began to leave the city, her brother was still quite excited, seeming to dream that he was already king. "The first thing I will do as king is display the head of that usurper and his family, the Lannisters, and the Starks along with all the other traitors, right in front of me, so I can look at them every day and see them rot, while their flesh is eaten by crows and vultures," Viserys said, like a dreamer. "And the Articans?" Daenerys suddenly asked, not knowing what her brother thought of them now. Her brother stopped laughing at that moment and looked at her with a strange glance. They are just another bunch of savages. They might have defeated the usurper at sea, but I will have 100,000 Dothraki. And I don't care if you have to sleep with each one of those 100,000 savages, As long as they devastate all my enemies, he mocked. But they're not as savage as you say, she murmured. Are you questioning me, Dany? Viserys looked at her seriously, disliking her response. It's not that, it's just... She stammered. I saw that they had Valyrian steel weapons. What? Impossible. Illyrio didn't tell me anything about that, Viserys said, surprised and scoffed. But I saw. Our ancestral sword is with them, she murmured, trying to make an excuse, since there was no point in hiding the information now. Still, she wanted to know if her brother could see some advantage in seeing them as allies, preferring to be on their side after meeting Arya and that king, rather than alongside Viserys and the Dothraki, who, as far as she knew, lived by raiding cities and committing crimes of plunder and rape. What did you say? Are you saying they have our sword? He immediately raised his voice, and she, having no choice, ended up speaking. Dark sister. I think I saw it on the waist of one of them through the window, she murmured, lying. What? He immediately exploded, slapping her face, making her fall to the side of the wagon, stunned by the blow. You're saying they had Dark Sister, the sword of our house? He growled at her. Why wasn't I informed of this? He demanded. I was in the room. There was no way to notify you, since the door was locked, she said, trembling. You fool, he shouted, kicking her in the chest, making her groan in pain. Her brother was becoming increasingly violent, while she lay on the floor of the wagon, gasping for air. Viserys clenched his fists and paced as much as he could there. You're saying those damned savages have my sword? I swear, if they don't hand it over, I'll use my future army to loot, kill all the men, and rape all the women beyond the wall, he continued to proclaim. Viserys looked at her once more, blaming her for not knowing about the sword sooner, and then approached before kicking her head, since there was no one else to vent his anger on. Her last memories were of that kick before she passed out, still wondering once more if her life would continue like this forever. When Daenerys woke up, it was already dark. They were in the middle of the desert, and she was no longer in the wagon, but in a camp set up by the 500 men that Illyrio had given them for the journey, whether unsullied or mercenaries from Planetos. She found herself being cared for by several servants who were placing cloths on her wounds made by Viserys, while her body was more sore than ever. After all, it seemed that Viserys had not stopped beating her after she fainted. I want you to treat all her wounds and get her ready to be presented to Khal Drogo, understood? Viserys appeared and demanded. Daenerys shuddered, while the servants nodded quickly and passed more cloths to make sure to clean her. She immediately placed her hand next to her dress and searched for where she had kept that special ointment, but realized that she had lost it. Daenerys couldn't help but feel a bit depressed upon realizing that she had lost the only thing that could make her feel a bit better at that moment. She looked at her brother, pacing back and forth, still seeming to be angry and demanding things from everyone there, as if he were the king of all. The people, mainly the mercenaries, obeyed him, but soon they had a look of anger towards him, seeming like they would betray him at the first opportunity they had. So now he is this, Daenerys thought, watching her brother. Viserys, who once had been kind, had long since turned into a sort of crazed beast, seeing only the Iron Throne before him, even if it seemed he would have to sell his very soul to achieve it. As mad as his father. Jon's voice echoed again in her mind. She just waited for her wounds to be treated by those women in silence, then sat up, hoping they would bring some food. While eating a mutton stew, Daenerys just wanted to be at peace with her pain and frustration, hoping her brother would not return to torment her. But that was too much to ask, for she heard Viserys walking towards her at that moment. He stared at her for a while before approaching. You know, Daenerys, I didn't want to do this to you, sister, but you forced my hand. I am too disappointed in you. I only hold back my rage because I do not want to spoil you for Khal Drogo, but it cannot be avoided at the wedding. After all, Khal Drogo won't mind getting rid of his wife along with her brother, will he? I will be your king, he spoke maliciously. Daenerys trembled. All of this made her feel empty. Her brother was wicked, and she wondered if her fate was truly such a thing without her being able to do anything about it. Now go to sleep. I will talk to you tomorrow, he said sternly, and she just nodded, heading to a tent prepared for her. She lay down on her bed, staring at the white tent. She did not know how much time had passed, but she stayed awake for hours, sad, as if she were a lifeless shell. It was then that a red line appeared to her and transformed into a point in the sky through the white tent. Raising an eyebrow as she watched the red line begin to rise and fall, seeming like something coming from outside, cutting through the dark night. The line fell somewhere in the camp, and a few seconds later, she heard screams. Daenerys stood up, surprised, as cries of enemy attack began to rise. She could not help but feel fear, thinking it was an attack from outside on the very first night. She began to hear the shouts and people screaming at their enemies and terrified servants, while also hearing the groans of dying men. She was terrified by all of it and could not even move as she hugged herself, with flames throughout the camp burning other tents. This lasted a while, as no one seemed to come to her tent, with men appearing in the gap of the entrance running back and forth, her not seeing clearly what was happening. But no one came close, until suddenly, everything went silent, and she just stared at the entrance of the tent, trembling with fear. It was then that someone approached, and, at the height of her fear with the person entering, she saw a woman completely dressed in armor, but knowing it was a woman due to the curve of her body. Daenerys still looked at her with fear and trembling, while she could not see who was behind that helmet, but noticed the woman's red hair, a shade redder than she had ever seen on a person. This stranger looked at Daenerys with a suspicious gaze, seeming to examine her deeply, as if looking for something more than a frightened girl in the tent. I know you have a lot of questions, but I am not here to hurt you. Come out now. My husband wants to talk to you, said the woman in a stern tone. Daenerys was surprised by this, but nodded, stepping carefully while the woman seemed to wait for her. She was so afraid she did not even notice her armor, just stepped out of the tent hoping not to die, just like that. Daenerys found a devastated area, full of bodies of those who accompanied them, most of the tents destroyed and burning. Men in armor different for what she thought would be Dothraki or bandits were holding position in the area, detaining those who survived. All the Unsullied had been killed. After all, they would fight to the end, but many mercenaries had surrendered. Come on, follow me. She heard the woman calling her again, and she just nodded, following her carefully. Ahead of them, in the middle of the camp, Daenerys looked at a man without a helmet and immediately recognized him, surprised to see the Ardecan king again. After all, she expected that he would have already left. Before him, Viserys was kneeling, his eyes glaring with rage at Jon. You will regret this, you bastard. I will kill you. Mark my words. Viserys shouted at Jon, before receiving a punch from him that sent him flying several meters back as he began to cough and bleed with a broken nose. But Jon did not stop there. Daenerys was stunned, watching Jon Artica walk up to her brother and start punching him as her brother continued to be beaten even more. You said you were going to kill me, you bastard. You are one of the most unpleasant people I have ever encountered in my life. You truly are scum, threatening your sister and making senseless threats, demanding things beyond your reality. Making threats you cannot fulfill. You're just a rat that likes to roar, but does nothing but hide in a hole. Jon continued hitting him until Viserys' face looked like a bloody pulp. Daenerys was trembling watching this. Jon, you're scaring her, said the red-haired woman, approaching, as Jon stopped beating him and looked at her and then at Daenerys, seeing her tremble. Jon sighed before getting up and leaving Viserys aside. I didn't want you to see this, despite what he has done to you, Jon said, as he took a step forward, but Daenerys immediately stepped back, frightened. He fell silent after that, realizing he had frightened her too much while Viserys was already unconscious. Jon then adopted a more serious and direct tone. I know I might not seem like the most pleasant person after what you've seen, but it's time for you to choose, Daenerys. If you want to continue with your brother, or accept my help and go to Artica, along with the other Targaryens. After all, your brother will not be welcome there. so I want you to really decide what to do." Jon spoke in a serious tone, while Daenerys looked at him, still afraid, but also nervous, as now she had a choice to make. Daenerys looked somewhat lost as she gazed at Jon, and beside him, her brother. Viserys lay on the ground like a bloody pulp, unconscious and still bleeding, in a state she had never seen before. As she turned her eyes back to the king of Artica, they wavered slightly. The woman beside her seemed quite impatient in the silence that followed, crossing her arms as she waited for Daenerys to speak. The Artican soldiers around the camp remained silent, waiting for their king to proceed with the conversation. She had a decision to make at that moment, and couldn't help but think of her childhood, of how Viserys had taken care of her. For a moment, a small part of her didn't want to accept the situation, so she wouldn't have to abandon her brother, despite the monster he had become. There was some hope that the Viserys who had truly cared for her was still somewhere inside him, but another part of her knew she would never see him the same way, even if he changed. She wouldn't forgive him after the things she had heard and suffered, even if she wanted to. Viserys would never again be seen as her loving brother. When the time comes, you will have two choices. Think very carefully, for your future will have two extremes. The voice of that woman in her dream echoed in her head once again as she spoke her final words before the dream ended, and Daenerys felt somewhat out of place because of it. Then, despite her nerves, she looked into Jon Artica's eyes, who continued to stare at her, waiting for her response. Trying to maintain a firm posture, she broke the silence. "Why should I believe you?" She raised her voice for the first time, no longer seeming so much like a scared girl. Jon raised an eyebrow, intrigued, and she continued, "You're a stranger. You just suddenly appear and say you're my relative, my nephew. I'll be honest, this is too much for me in the last few days. What makes you think I would just accept going with you, considering we're strangers to each other? You could treat me the same way my brother treated me. What makes you think I wouldn't be betrayed by you too? After all, everyone has betrayed us." She murmured, waiting for his response, as she tried to keep her gaze on Jon's green eyes. Jon just sighed. "Well, that's fair," he began. "But look at us. Do we seem like savages as you thought?" He asked calmly, as his hand lifted slightly, as if to indicate all the Articans there. "No, you're nothing like the savages I heard about," she admitted. "Itchy why? Don't call me a savage. We were free folk before becoming Articans. Free folk." Someone roared so loudly that it shattered Daenerys' confidence as she looked at him in fear, it being none other than Tormund, wearing a helmet stained with blood. "Don't scare her, Tormund," Jon said, raising his hand to the man who spat on the ground. Tormund merely grumbled, refraining from continuing his loud complaints about trivial things. "As you can see, we're not like those who want to sow discord among us, as they describe us. But I can't prove right now that I am your blood. However, tell me, answer me one thing first. What do you think would happen to you at the end of this journey through the desert?" Jon asked. Daenerys seemed a bit lost with that question and trembled at the lips before pondering. "I would be sold to some Khal, marrying him so that my brother would have an army to conquer the 7 kingdoms," she said. "And tell me, would you be happy with that future?" he asked again. As Daenerys' eyes trembled at the question, she answered, seeing nothing good in it. "No," she said, almost unable to continue. "How about this, Aunt, if I may call you that? Come with me, and I give you my word, I swear by everything sacred, by all my gods, that I will not harm you. But I would like a chance to prove that we are family. I want you to meet Aemon, who can live in Artica a much better life than what you're describing. After all, you're an innocent girl. You don't deserve to go through this," Jon said, looking at her with a calm and even loving gaze. After all, she was his kin, his blood. Daenerys struggled internally upon hearing this. It seemed like a point of no return to follow this group she had known for such a short time, and she was uncertain about anything with them, aside from what she had heard and seen in the past few days. So, as much as she was tempted to accept the offer of meeting relatives she had never seen, the idea that there were more Targaryens out there, a part of her truly wanted to believe that Jon was a relative, that she saw him as her nephew. But with the uncertainty she felt, She remembered the dream of the woman and the children, and before that, of the dragon in that city. "Answer me one thing," she suddenly requested, while Jon waited for her to continue. "Is it true that there's a giant tree in the middle of the city of Artica?" she asked, as everyone around looked at her with curiosity. "Arya told you that?" Jon asked, raising an eyebrow, slightly dissatisfied, as he didn't want her to speak about his kingdom or such things concerning it in this way, as it was still a secret. "No, I had a dream," she stammered, admitting it as Jon raised an eyebrow. "You dream of Artica?" He couldn't help but be curious and intrigued by this. "I dreamed last night, after applying the ointment, and I also saw a dragon there. Is that true? Do you have a dragon?" She let her voice rise louder than she intended, with some expectation, but then suddenly, everyone around began to laugh. "So, there aren't any dragons there?" she murmured in embarrassment, feeling ridiculed by the question, something common for someone to ask for a dragon in these times. After all, they had been extinct for a long time. As a Targaryen, she dreamed of having these creatures again under her family's control and, preferably, between her legs as she rode them through the sky like a horse. "Girl, it seems you dreamed too little. There isn't just one dragon in Artica. There are at least 13 of them." Ygritte responded beside her, raising an eyebrow at Daenerys, who looked quite shocked, wondering if she was lying or something. "What do you mean, 13 dragons?" she murmured, wanting to know. Jon took a few steps closer, analyzing her. "You used that ointment and dreamed of Artica right afterward?" he asked curiously as Daenerys nodded, though she was still waiting for an answer to her question. "That ointment had magic from the children of the forest. It must have activated something in you. Maybe you're like Daenerys, the dreamer." He couldn't help but murmur, considering the possibility that she had some clairvoyance magic triggered by magical stimulus. But it was too early to confirm anything, so he turned his attention back to the girl. "Yes, everything you dreamed is true," he affirmed at last, while Daenerys still tried to recall more details from her dream, such as the woman who had spoken those words. "You will have a choice." And also the children, who were all hers? If that woman was her, then who could be the father, she thought before looking at Jon, noticing his features in the older boy, whom she had paid the most attention to before her eyes had focused solely on the woman when she appeared. This thought quickly raised her eyebrow before a blush appeared on her face, and she quickly averted her eyes from him, not wanting to reveal her thoughts. Jon merely stood there in silence, waiting for his aunt to decide to come with him. She was true family, someone he didn't even know existed and now had the chance to help. "And my brother?" she suddenly asked despite her shyness, still wanting to know what would become of Viserys, as a small part of her was still a little concerned about her own blood. "I won't take him, no matter what you say, Aunt. This man is a plague, and if it were up to me, I'd kill him right here and now." Jon spoke sincerely. "No, don't kill him," Daenerys pleaded, not wanting her only brother to die. Then she looked at Jon and finally made her decision. "All right, I'll go with you. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I want you to prove to me that you really are my relative, a Targaryen, and I want to see your kingdom," she said at last, though her voice wasn't as confident as she had imagined. Jon nodded, smiling at his innocent aunt. "Great. Put her in the wagon and let's organize things before heading back to the coast. After we clean up this mess, release all the soldiers we've captured who are still alive. There's no point in keeping them with us. Let them find their way back on their own," Jon said at last, as his men quickly began giving orders throughout the camp to the other Articans. "Come with me, girl," Daenerys heard the red-haired woman beside her say. With no other choice, she ended up following her and soon found herself being placed inside a nearby wagon. Another Artican woman appeared as soon as the redhead returned to join Jon. "Take this, it will ease your wounds, and there are better clothes to wear in the wagon. These are dresses that the king ordered exclusively for his kin, so they are the finest in Artica." The woman smiled as she handed over the items, and Daenerys nodded in response. She felt a little lost with all of this. Her gaze drifted to the window as soon as she entered the wagon, and the door was closed, though not locked as she had feared. She watched the men organizing the camp, wondering if she would ever see her brother again after this. She accepted the possibility and knew deep down that she might never see him again. Perhaps, with some hope, that dream was her future in Artica, that it was her current self in that vision. As the Artican soldiers finally finished and began leaving the camp, mounting their horses and starting the journey back to the coast, where they had hidden a few ships a few hours earlier, Jon maintained direct surveillance on Planetos from the moment they left and did not head south as soon as Planetos disappeared beyond the horizon. As soon as he learned that his uncle and Illyrio were plotting, primarily under the influence of the latter, who seemed to manipulate Viserys very well, he quickly commanded them to move to the coast and intercept the group fleeing into the desert. Now, Jon was happy to have his aunt with him, or at least she had given him the chance to get to know her better. He wanted to show her Artica, leaving her brother behind to live only by his luck, which Jon believed wouldn't last long. Before heading to the wagons, he also didn't miss the opportunity to catch a raven and attach a scroll to it, watching it fly into the darkness of the night, sending it back to Planetos. In no time, Illyrio would know what had happened. And, as Jon noted, the Magister wanted to separate the Targaryens as far away from him as possible. He didn't know how his business with Planetos would fare, but he didn't care anymore, as the most important thing was having his aunt rather than negotiating with that city. This letter would deliver a checkmate against Illyrio. Jon didn't care about his plans, but if he tried to interfere again with his aunt and him, Jon would invade Planetos before hunting him down and bringing him to live in Artica, but not as a guest or even a citizen. "I'll talk to her and join you shortly," Jon said to Ygritte beside him, who clicked her tongue, looking at him with suspicion. Jon went directly to the wagon, where he found the girl admiring the clothes she had been given, feeling the fabric she had never seen before. That was until she was startled by his presence, clutching the clothes and looking at him cautiously. Jon sighed. "Sorry about that. May I sit here? I just want to exchange a few words," he asked, and Daenerys nodded, not having much choice. Jon didn't want to be seen as someone frightening to her, but he had no choice. He had to act and hope that would change in the coming days. To help, he came to speak with her now, carrying something that would assist her. "Well, I know you were hesitant, but I'm still glad you chose to come with us. You are my blood, and I promise to treat you as such. That's why I want to give you a gift," he said as he retrieved something attached to his armor. He lifted the object for her to see, while Daenerys looked on curiously before her eyes widened. Recognizing what Jon held in his hand after so long. "This is," she murmured. "Yes, your mother's crown. Now it belongs to you. I bought it in Bravos and intended to keep it as something very precious, but I believe it will be better in your hands. After all, you are her daughter," Jon said, holding the crown out in front of her while Daenerys gazed at it in wonder, carefully taking it into her hands. "Well, I'll be going now. I need to be with my wife. But tomorrow we'll meet again, and I hope we can talk more, Aunt," Jon said finally, as he began to rise and leave. He didn't want to simply stay there after everything that had happened. He wanted to give the girl some space to breathe and think before they had a better conversation and allowed her to open up to him. They continued traveling throughout the night without any issues. Daenerys fell asleep while gently caressing the crown she had received, constantly thinking about what her future would be like from now on. A part of her missed Viserys more out of a dependency on her brother, as he had always been there to make all the decisions. Another part of her kept her heart a bit anxious about what awaited her with this unfamiliar group. That night, she had more dreams. She found herself holding small hands for days, with two children by her sides, looking at her strangely. "Are you all right, Mother?" She let go of the two boys' hands and looked ahead, an older boy, the one she had seen in her dreams, who was now looking at her curiously. "Yes, yes," Daenerys stammered nervously, not understanding what she was doing there while feeling that her voice was much more mature than it had ever been. "Are you sure?" None of the children seemed convinced as they eyed her suspiciously. Whatever. You must be missing father. Come on, we're almost at the ancient dragon, the older boy exclaimed, and she had no choice but to follow him, though with very cautious steps, not knowing what she was doing there with children calling her mother. They proceeded to one of the last platforms of the mountain, where she was met with an open sky full of clouds and dragons flying all around. This? She seemed shocked. Ha ha ha! The children appeared excited as they laughed, pointing at the dozens of dragons flying through the sky. They seemed accustomed to this sight, but Daenerys was in shock. I see you've arrived. An ancient voice was suddenly heard. Yes, I came to hear your stories. Tell me more about Valyria, the older boy exclaimed, which caught Daenerys' attention. She then saw a gigantic, entirely white dragon, with a beard below its neck, resembling an old man, though its gaze was sharp. But what startled Daenerys the most was that the voice she had heard earlier came from that dragon, while her supposed son ran toward it, talking. And, just as she expected, the dragon actually responded to the boy. Ho ho ho. Of course, why don't you sit down for a bit, and we'll start a new history lesson, my little dragon. The dragon's voice resonated through the area, while there were no other dragons there that could speak, with all of them roaring across the sky. But first, I feel that my mother is acting strange. Is something wrong with her? The boy suddenly spoke with concern, while Daenerys froze, wondering what was going to happen to her. The dragon raised its head, staring at her, as if studying her with a sharp gaze before its expression softened. She's fine. She's just thinking about her future, the dragon replied gently before continuing. Let's begin with some stories of my life in Valyria, but first, it said directly to Daenerys, you need to return, for you cannot just keep dreaming of your future. Live in the present more than anything, my girl. I hope to see you soon. The dragon simply responded before she felt a wave of nausea, and the entire space began to blur, while the children exclaimed in concern for their mother, and Daenerys found herself waking up inside the tent again with gentle knocks at the door. Daenerys Targaryen. The king requests that you join him for the first meal, she heard the woman who appeared after the queen say. All right, I'm coming, she murmured, still a bit dazed, trying not to dwell too much on her dream as she dressed in something that had been provided. She soon exited and was treated well by everyone, despite her initial fear, as she sat down to speak with Jon. There was a red-haired woman beside him, whom she recognized as Jon's wife. The woman nodded in acknowledgement, but maintained a sharp gaze on her for some reason, though it wasn't quite hostile. Well, Aunt, let me introduce you. This is my wife, Ygritte Artica, Queen of Artica. We have a daughter, and she looks just like you in coloring, Jon said with a small, cordial smile. It's a pleasure, Queen Ygritte of Artica. Daughter, Daenerys murmured, a bit surprised, also admiring the beauty of this woman. But she soon focused on Jon's last words. It's a pleasure to see you again, Daenerys Targaryen and Jon's aunt. Yes, we have a daughter who stayed in Artica, being cared for by Serena, another queen. She has white hair and purple eyes. Her name is Lyanna Stark, named after Jon's mother, Ygritte said calmly. Jon invited her to eat, and they did so without anyone disturbing them while Jon asked Daenerys a few questions. However, she was still too reserved to engage in conversation, trying to get used to the idea of being called an aunt and being among strangers. She relaxed a bit when Jon didn't insist that she address him as king, allowing her to call him nephew for the time being. They continued the journey without delving too deeply into conversation, keeping things basic while Jon checked on how she was doing and made sure she had everything she needed, though she was too shy to ask for anything. Finally, they saw the coast some time later, where their ships were anchored. Of course, there were a few curious onlookers who had already spotted them in the desert or nearby fishermen, but it wouldn't make any difference now. Let's go, men, Jon ordered, and everyone nodded, heading to the ships as they were pulled from the shore. With giants doing the heavy lifting, Daenerys was stunned to see these massive men pushing the ships and dragging them from the sand. There were at least 30 of them. She boarded the main ship right after Jon and then encountered someone. Familiar. Hey, you were rescued, weren't you? Clarissa, Arya remarked, unable to resist giving her a mischievous smile as she crossed her arms and stared at her. Daenerys immediately felt embarrassed, remembering that she had lied to this girl in Pentos. I'm sorry about that, she murmured as Arya's smile widened. Don't worry about it. I know now that you're Daenerys Targaryen, Jon's aunt. It's funny, isn't it? Because I thought he was my brother for many years, Arya commented cheerfully. She looks so much like Jon's daughter. Wind approached at that moment, looking curiously at Daenerys, who immediately took a step back, a bit frightened by the sudden appearance of a child of the forest, something she had never heard of. Wind seemed offended by this, looking disappointed at Daenerys. Hey, you shouldn't act like that. You might offend her. Arya noticed this and said, as if reprimanding Daenerys, who looked stunned. Who are you? No, what are you? She asked, letting her voice falter a bit. They are children of the forest, Daenerys. You'll find many of them in Artica, so don't be so surprised. I know you were startled, and it was my mistake not to describe them to you beforehand, but know that they are sacred to us. After all, they are closer to the gods than any of us, Jon explained, and Daenerys nodded as Arya pulled Wind closer to her. I'll introduce you, but first, apologize to her, Arya insisted, and Daenerys, unable to react otherwise, found herself drawn into the conversation, murmuring apologies. She couldn't help but keep her eyes on Jon as she watched him giving orders, his wife accompanying him by his side. He instructed that the ships begin moving away from the shore, while the giants walked across the deck, and there were small men, introduced as dwarves, who grumbled to one another as they went about their tasks. She also sighed when she saw a huge wolf walking onto the deck, while everyone seemed to shrug it off as if it were a normal sight. The wolf walked over to Jon, and another one soon appeared beside it, not as large as the first. Look, that's Jon's wolf ghost. He's 3 meters tall. Incredible, isn't it? And beside him is my she-wolf. Her name is Nymeria, and she's 2 meters tall. Arya pointed to the wolf that had accompanied her for many years, ever since it was a pup in Artica. Now, it had grown, forming a ward bond stronger than any of the other direwolves under her control. Daenerys now found herself involved with this group on their journey south. She had to wait to see this kingdom. After all, Jon had asked if she wanted to go to Artica or travel with him. She ended up choosing to stay with him. After all, she didn't know him and wanted to be sure of who this man claiming to be her nephew really was, and she wanted to get to know him better. After all, he was kind and aware of that strange dream. Meanwhile, in another place where the sun was hot, a woman lay on her bed, looking out the window, enjoying the coastal breeze in a desert and arid land like Dorne, until a knock on the door was heard, and Nyra carefully got up, putting on a dress as she approached the door, opening it cautiously. My lady, Prince Doran, is summoning you to the main hall, the man said respectfully. Nyra just adjusted her hair a little before leaving the room, accompanied by some guards, heading toward the castle's main area. Finally, she was meeting with her uncle for a conversation with her cousins, one she hadn't participated in for a long time due to her unique condition. You're here, Doran murmured as his gaze shifted to his sons and brothers. You all leave now. I'll have this conversation privately with her, he said. Oberyn sighed, but left the room, even though he didn't want to. Why must we leave? Shouldn't I know everything? Arianne immediately complained. The relationship between Arianne and Nyra had cooled significantly, as Arianne seemed to harbor resentment toward Nyra, looking at her belly with a certain envy, and she was too cold. Nyra, however, just accepted it, as it seemed her cousin was jealous of her. This is a conversation between me and your cousin, Doran insisted, and she chose to leave, leaving only Doran and Nyra. The Articans are coming here. We received a raven today about their sighting to the north, and I received a letter from them this morning. They're on a trade campaign now in Essos and seem to have been quite successful in Bravos. They're moving down the continent, but some ships separated from the fleet before going to Bravos, and they are heading here. The Arctic Minister of Foreign Affairs is coming to have a conversation with me to discuss the situation between Artica and Dorne, Doran explained. Will you tell their king about me? Nyra asked, hoping the answer would be affirmative. After all, he had to know. Do you expect me to talk about your condition? Not yet. It won't be very useful for us to discuss it now. We could gain more after we settle a few things. Dorne spoke in a negotiator's tone, while Nyra frowned. But he should know, Nyra said with a stern tone. You don't understand, niece. The child you carry could be very useful to us if we use it correctly. It's not the right time yet. That's why I want to negotiate when he's personally here or when the Seven Kingdoms are in conflict with him. I hope he takes the Seven Kingdoms and will help him, Dorne said. Jon doesn't seem to want the Seven Kingdoms, Nyra scoffed. Not yet, but soon he could have them, as their king, and you beside him with your son being the heir to the Iron Throne, Dorne declared, as this was the best chance for them to exact revenge and return their bloodline to power. When he learned of Rhaenys' pregnancy, he was surprised, but after seeing what Jon did in the West and with the king, it became a blessing. Even though Jon didn't seem to like them much, with a child linking him to his niece, he wouldn't have a choice. But to make everything work, there were still a few more things that needed to be settled. Dorne looked at her seriously now. And I don't want to see you appearing in front of any Artican, understand? He demanded, while Nyra frowned once again at hearing something she didn't agree with. After all, she was carrying Jon's baby, and she had already expressed her desire to marry him. Dorne agreed with that. It was obvious that Jon was the best match. However, Dorne wanted to profit as much as possible from this situation between the Articans and Dorne, and there were other wives, with Rhaenys becoming his third wife. Not that she cared about that now. After all, she only wanted to raise her child well, and alongside the father, the man she loved and thought about every day. Yes, Nyra responded with disgust. She was angry at how Dorne was treating her child as a commodity. She wondered what she should do when the Articans arrived. Should she hide, or should she tell them about the child she was expecting from their king? After all, she was sure that Jon would never abandon her, that he loved her just as much and would be very happy with this child as well. It wouldn't take more than 2 moons for the baby to be born. And so, Nyra returned to her room, walking while gently caressing her belly. There were some things she never forgot, and one of them was how Jon had questioned her about wanting to be a chess piece for her uncle. Perhaps she could become free and not be a puppet, as she was beginning to feel more than ever with the natural maternal. Instinct to protect her offspring, not wanting him to become something like she had. Magister Illyrio was having a difficult moment while sitting in his solar with a letter before him. A strange raven had appeared at dawn and waited on its perch until a servant came to check it. He had had such a peaceful night, thinking he had made a clever move and that his next steps, along with Varys, would be to start sowing discord in Westeros, which was not difficult with the secrets Varys possessed. All he needed now was to figure out how to deal with the Articans. Upon waking, he went to have his first meal, only to be interrupted by the news of a raven bearing a letter with the Artican symbol on it. He raised an eyebrow and quickly stood up to see what it was about. As soon as he entered to read the letter, he was initially stunned. He had thought that he had gotten rid of them easily, the Targaryens, where their blood would mix with the Dothraki and disappear into the desert. He intended to wait a bit longer before arranging the marriage, especially as he was waiting for 3 petrified dragon eggs to arrive from the lands of shadow, as he had recommended. Perhaps it's better to give them to him, Illyrio told himself at that moment, while thinking about the future. Now he had come to see the letter from the Articans and opened it, but it was not at all what he had expected. The very thing he had most tried to avoid had happened, causing him to frown at the first paragraph of the letter. Hello, esteemed Magister Illyrio. This is the Arctic King. I'm writing to inform you that I've just encountered some interesting people in the desert, namely 2 Targaryen siblings. I've taken one of them, as I saw some strangeness in this situation, and I'm being direct, since I'm a king and you're a businessman. After all, we're both busy men, aren't we? Especially you, considering that you didn't even manage to properly receive our group. This was the first part, and everything Illyrio feared was right there, as he began to continue reading the rest of the letter. But after what I saw and discovered, I believe you were trying to hide them from us. But I won't act against you. However, be warned, I will be taking the girl with me. After all, I sympathize with the fate you placed her in. It's quite sad, actually, arranging her marriage to a call, which also seemed rather malicious on your part, as if you were trying to get rid of them. Personally, I don't believe the Dothraki are a force considerable enough to make a difference in Westeros, even if they manage to cross the sea, which is quite unlikely as well. And I doubt Viserys would survive that long among the Dothraki with his personality. But anyway, I'll be taking the girl. I sincerely hope you inform your friend in King's Landing, Varys, that if the king finds out about the girl's whereabouts, bad things will happen to both of you. It would be smart not to make any move against me now. Not that I would care about it in other circumstances, but I believe the king might take drastic actions, even against the Starks, to demand the girl's handover. I just don't want a headache, after all. I'd have to kill a lot of people if that happens, and frankly, it wouldn't be good for any of us. But don't worry, I won't leave you completely at a loss. You'll still have a Targaryen. Feel free to do what you want with him. They should be arriving at any moment. After all, there were some survivors. As for Viserys, I was a bit harsh when I started hitting him, as he seemed to have never been struck in his life. Well, to conclude, I'm ending all of our contracts, as I don't believe we can continue after what has happened. Good luck in your endeavors, Magister Illyrio. And until next time, for I don't think this will be the last time we meet. We'll meet one day, and pray that we're not enemies by then. Sincerely, King of Artica. He had finished reading and stared for a while at the letter before him, thinking about what to do next, until he quickly pulled another piece of parchment from one of the drawers, grabbed a quill, and began writing a letter to his friend Varys. Varys, something urgent has happened. Something much worse than we expected. I sent you some letters, but now I believe they were probably all stolen by the Arctic King. Let me explain my situation. He began to write everything in detail until he finally finished, still staring at it with a frown. He sent a new raven to King's Landing, and Jon let this one in particular go to its destination. After that, he locked himself in his solar, thinking about what he should do now, knowing his fellow magisters would not be pleased with the cancellation of the Artican trade contract. After all, Planetos would not become the only city in Essos without their products, and he would have to come up with a good excuse and explanation. Hours passed until the group of mercenaries he had hired finally returned from the desert. Initially, his group had at least 300 unsullied and 200 mercenaries, but only 50 mercenaries had returned out of 500, along with some servants. They were not at all happy with what had happened. As soon as they entered the mansion, with Illyrio going to receive them, the one who seemed to be the leader, who had accepted the contract and had survived only because he dropped his weapon after seeing his men being cut down like insects by the Articans, approached Illyrio with a face showing great anger. Hey, you damn merchant! You didn't tell us we'd be facing those Articans who were in the city. You deceived us, he began to complain furiously. You knew, didn't you? Another mercenary confronted him. Illyrio, coldly, responded before raising his voice. Does that change anything for you? Do you think I knew where you would be attacked by them? Do you think you were the only ones who lost? Do you have any idea how much an unsullied costs? He spoke with a stern tone to the mercenaries, equally angry for having lost so much and not achieving the results he expected. Take some extra coin, and that ends the matter, Illyrio said finally. The mercenaries, frustrated, accepted the money, but not without grumbling. Fine, but I'll never get involved with you or any business that involves those northern bastards again. One of them commented to his companion as they left. It was terrifying to think about how they had been cut down by the men who attacked them, without even having a chance, while their arrows did not penetrate the armor, and their range and aim were unquestionable. Not to mention how they were cut down by men using spears and swords invading the camp. We have this one who survived, but his face is a mess. Personally, I would have liked to have done it myself, but as you can see, that Artican got to him first. The leader of the mercenaries pointed to some men bringing Viserys, all bruised, on a stretcher, approaching Illyrio. "Fine, you can disappear now," Illyrio said in the end with a hint of anger due to the loss, while the mercenary glared at him with equal anger before spitting and following his men out. Illyrio returned to Viserys, who was still unconscious, thinking that his face must be completely destroyed, as the mercenaries hadn't even bothered to clean him up. "Take him inside," Illyrio ordered his servants, who quickly took the Targaryen and began tending to his injuries. Illyrio then handed a letter to one of his men. "I want this order delivered to some organizations in the city to have all the surviving mercenaries killed. After all, they can't spread the news that one of the Targaryens has been captured," he said as he watched his messenger leave. Illyrio now had to deal with a very complicated situation. As he returned to his chambers, he didn't know what he should do now with Varys. He was practically useless at this point, and now Khal Drogo would not be happy to know that the wife he had requested had been captured by someone else. "Despite everything, I might be able to use this to my advantage," he muttered, not dismissing the possibility of turning the Dothraki, or at least Drogo's Khalasar, against the Articans. So he went inside with this thought, where he would have to think more carefully about it and how he would explain the situation to the other magisters of the city. Meanwhile, at sea, the Arctic ship continued to sail along the coast of the continent, having been released by the largest ship in the fleet, where Jon and his family were aboard. In one of the rooms, Daenerys was just waking up that morning, opening her eyes to look at the ceiling of the ship, lying in a rather large and comfortable bed, in a room much bigger than the one she had in Planetos. Only a day had passed since they had set out to sea and were heading south, and Daenerys was still trying to understand everything that was happening, try to assimilate the new situation, the environment, and, most of all, the new people. With a sigh, she got out of bed, wearing a robe for sleeping, and went to her wardrobe, where she saw several clothes left exclusively for her, made by some artisans aboard the ships. She couldn't help but notice the luxury of the place. She picked up the black dress with the symbol of her house, finding it so beautiful and realizing she had never worn anything like it before. What she feared most wasn't happening. On the contrary, she was treated well here, much more so than in Planetos, although things hadn't been so bad there either. It reminded her of the times with Ser Willem Darry when they lived in Braavos. The man also treated her like a princess, as in addition to having her needs met, she had a say in what she could ask for. After getting dressed, adjusting the three-headed dragon on her chest, she went to a large mirror above a table full of items that her supposed nephew had left for her. She picked up one of the combs to tidy her hair and glanced at the other items, unsure of what to do with them. Besides the beautiful and well-made clothes, there were perfumes and makeup, things she had never had the luxury of having so easily. Her bruises were still visible, and she hated having to show them in front of others. But it seemed there was already a healer on the ship, named Lade, who visited her periodically to remind her to use the ointments. She said that in a week, she would feel much better, and in 2 weeks, it would be as if nothing had happened. Daenerys picked up one of the makeup items and began applying it to hide her bruises. She looked at herself in the mirror to check if it looked all right, managing to conceal some of it. She felt as presentable as possible, and like any woman, she liked to feel beautiful. After making sure she had concealed the bruises well with makeup, she took a deep breath, feeling a bit nervous about leaving the room. After all, she was still surrounded by strangers. She didn't dislike them, but she had only been with them for a short time amidst all the sudden changes, especially dealing with the man who claimed to be her nephew, someone whom, at this point, much of her wanted to believe. So she went to the door, opening it and feeling a bit surprised to see a guard waiting. It was an Artican woman, wearing the greenish steel armor that all the royal guards wore. Princess Daenerys, the woman greeted her. Hi. Daenerys responded, a little nervous. Your nephew, our king, requested that as soon as you awoke, I accompany you to the main table, where he awaits you for the first meal, she said calmly. Daenerys simply nodded. The woman began walking through the ship, which Daenerys still didn't know well, until they reached the place after passing some guards keeping watch by the door. It was a more open area, where they had had lunch and dinner the day before. She saw Jon, his wife Ygritte, Arya, and the child of the forest called Wind, eating at the table. Jon looked up and smiled. Hello, Aunt. It's good to see you here. Please sit and join us, he said. The guard who had accompanied Daenerys stepped aside to give her space to pass. Quickly, Daenerys advanced to the table and sat across from Arya. Although she had already had a few meals there, Daenerys always ate in silence, merely listening to them converse without interacting. Good morning, she greeted everyone. Good morning, Daenerys. Arya smiled. Good morning, white-haired woman, Wind said, laughing. Ygritte looked at her for a moment and greeted her. Good morning. Ygritte was more cautious than Serena, for if it had been Jon's other wife, she would have greeted Daenerys with a broad smile, but each had their own personality. They ate quietly while Jon talked with his family. Jon, it was so unfair that I had to stay on the ship while you all went to fight. Arya was complaining about being left behind. I wanted to settle it quickly, so I brought my aunt along, and I needed someone to take care of Wind, Jon responded. What do you think I would have done? The child of the forest protested. As you were about to sneak past the guards, luckily I'm a different kind of warg than the others, or it would have been hard to find you. I'm also lucky that you can't change into other people yet. Otherwise, it would have been even more troublesome to catch you. Children of the forest had some special gifts, and they could even deceive animals and those who control them. But it was fun, she said with an ironic smile while Jon rolled his eyes. Anyway, Jon ended the conversation before turning to Daenerys. How have you been, Aunt? I hope your room is to your liking. Daenerys had been paying attention to the giant wolf lying on the floor with its tongue out when she suddenly realized her nephew was addressing her. Why, yes. I'm fine. Much better than I could have asked for. Nephew, she stammered and gave her answer, caught off guard, while the last part came out in a weak tone. That's good. Soon we'll be heading to Myr, but I would prefer if you stayed on the ship to avoid drawing attention. However, if you'd like to come, it's all right, he said with a small smile. I'll think about it, she said in the end, as she did want to see Myr, but didn't have the courage to say it aloud, while Jon raised an eyebrow at her, knowing her intentions. Are your wounds any better? He asked. Yes, she murmured. I'll talk to you later, and I intend to get rid of them, he said, leaving Daenerys confused as Jon got up from the bed and left. For now, I have some things to take care of. Let's go, Ghost. Jon called the giant wolf. Ygritte also got up. I'll go with you, Jon. She followed him, leaving only Daenerys and the younger ones at the table. He's going to lock himself in that cabin and stay there all day. Arya complained, wanted to train with Jon, but today wouldn't be the day. Or make another baby, Wind commented, covering her mouth and laughing. Wind, stop saying those things. Besides, Ygritte wouldn't want to get pregnant in the middle of a journey. She got sick the last time, Arya replied, then looked at Daenerys, who was watching her curiously. If you're wondering what Jon is doing in there, he's making a map of the coasts of both continents. He can see through his birds in the sky and create exact and perfect drawings, Arya explained with a smile. I see, Daenerys murmured, feeling more open to talking with Arya, as they had already had a conversation in Planetos. What did he say about being a warg and this thing about seeing through his eagles? What is that? She asked, curious. You haven't learned yet, but wargs are people who can enter the minds of animals. Arya is one. She can do it with her wolves, and many other Articans can as well. But Jon is special. After all, most need to stay conscious in their original bodies to take over the animal, but he can do it with just a thought and control multiple bodies. It's incredible. Wind explained. Does that really exist? Daenerys seemed shocked by this. Of course, pay attention, Arya replied, and in the next moment, her eyes turned white, leaving Daenerys slightly startled. Suddenly, the door opened, and a 2-meter-tall wolf entered. They seemed like children before the wolf as it walked around the table and sat next to Arya, looking at Daenerys, who shrank back as if the wolf were laughing at her, while Wind burst into laughter. A moment later, they left the main table and went to the deck, with Daenerys still thinking about everything she had heard and seen. She stayed with the girls, not knowing what else to do, and watched Arya training with the Dark Sister sword while Wind caused some mischief, as the Articans around the ship interacted with them. Daenerys observed everything in silence as the day passed, watching men and women, dwarves and giants, walking back and forth. Eventually, Lade appeared. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "I'm fine. It doesn't sting anymore." Daenerys replied with a small smile. "That's good. I heard the king is going to heal you. It seems this will be faster than I anticipated," Lade said. "What do you mean by that?" Daenerys couldn't help but ask. "You'll find out soon," Lade replied simply with a smile before walking away. Around midday, they had a meal, but Jon and Ygritte didn't appear for dinner. In the afternoon, Daenerys went to a quiet corner of the ship just to feel the ocean breeze while watching the hundreds of ships following theirs. Each of those ships carried other men, dwarves, and Artican giants. How many Articans must be out there? How does he manage to control all of them and give orders? She couldn't help but wonder aloud, admiring how organized they were. There are more than 22,000 Articans. Each ship has over 50 of them, and it's easy to organize and give orders to them. Suddenly, Jon's voice came from behind her, surprising her in the middle of the afternoon as she saw him approaching alone. "Do you see the birds circling us in the sky?" Before she could answer, he pointed upward, and she looked with a curious gaze, indeed seeing several birds flying back and forth in the sky. "Are they possessed by other people?" she murmured, and Jon almost wanted to laugh at how she thought of the wargs. "Exactly. I mean, we call that ability wargs. There are several wargs on every ship. My command system is through them, while an order is passed to the leaders and sub-leaders, who quickly organize their people for any decision I would make. It's much easier to handle the Articans this way than to concentrate everything in a central power," Jon explained, and Daenerys nodded, impressed. Jon stood by her side at that moment, his gaze falling on her. They were the same age, but she felt even a little less mature than Arya, while Jon was someone who could command all those 22,000 men whenever he wanted. "I know you're still very shy about expressing your thoughts on certain things, but rest assured that anything you ask will be heard by me and the others, as long as it's within our reach. If you want to go to the city of Myr, that's perfectly fine. You can visit it with royal guards who will accompany you, while I'll be negotiating with their magisters," he said. "All right," she said before looking at him. "I would like to visit the city. Viserys always said that my mother had the desire to visit many cities on this continent, and Myr was one of them," she said, and Jon nodded, pleased to hear her true wish. "Very well, then. You will see the city," he said with a smile, before looking at her injury. "That's not as good as I had imagined," he commented, even though her bruises were covered with makeup, while Daenerys shrank back, trying to avoid his gaze, thinking he was judging her. "Look at me," he asked, and she obeyed, seeing him place the palm of his hand over her hidden black eye. "I told you I would heal you, didn't I?" he said, and before the Targaryen girl could respond, his hand began to glow. She felt warmth and was stunned by the glow in the next moment, almost pulling away instinctively, but it was quite pleasant, and she tried to stay still. Jon stood there, touching her face for a few seconds before removing his hand and smiling. "Now it's much better. You truly bring out the Targaryen beauty, Aunt. I hope my daughter is as beautiful as you," he said kindly, boosting his aunt's self-esteem, not that he was worried about his daughter growing up unattractive. After all, his children would all be beautiful, with mothers as stunning as theirs, surpassing even Daenerys. "Now you're fine. I came to see you quickly just for that. I hope we can talk more later. Now I need to organize a few things, and maybe even train a bit with Arya. She always insists I train with her," Jon said with a smile, beginning to walk away, taking advantage of the last hours of the day, leaving Daenerys there, stunned, touching her face and realizing all her bruises were gone, unable to believe what had just happened. Myr was finally seen on the Continental Line as the ships quickly approached. Unsurprisingly, the city was already aware of their presence. With only 30 ships from the hundreds of the fleet, by default, they were approaching the port. The ship didn't take long to dock at the port after seeing an open spot for them to place their ships. When the ramp was placed, Jon looked at his men, all preparing to disembark, and shortly after, his gaze turned to Arya, who was approaching. "This is good. You'll come with me this time, all right? Afterward, you can visit the city," Jon said, as Arya nodded, since she hadn't participated in any negotiations the last 2 times and didn't want to postpone it for herself anymore. "And I will stay on the ship. I'm not in the mood for business," Ygritte said with boredom, and Jon nodded. His final look was toward Daenerys, the girl who was wearing a white dress due to the sun of Essos, as black clothes absorb more heat. She was also approaching with some of the royal guards who would stay with her that day, while she admired the city, finally showing her own desires, something she had started to demonstrate more in the past few days. As they continued traveling, Daenerys began to express herself more and feel more at ease, and Jon was pleased with that. "Well, I hope you can enjoy the city. Myr is known for glassmaking and its highly demanded fabrics, even in Westeros. I hope you enjoy it well, and don't hesitate to express your wishes to the Artican men and women who will accompany you. After all, these guards will protect you and do their best for anything within their reach." "Understood." Jon approached her and spoke. "All right, thank you, nephew." The girl nodded timidly, excited to see another different city. "Great, now let's begin," Jon said, starting to disembark from the ship with his minister and guards, while a group, which included the main people of the city, being the magistrates of Myr, came to greet him with great respect. "King of Artica, it's good to finally see you. Myr is welcoming you, which is an honor for all of us." A fat man, full of jewels, approached, while other equally fat men came behind. "These people like to eat," Arya murmured quietly beside Jon, as she looked at all those fat men. There was only one young man, with a rather arrogant look among them. He seemed like a teenager a bit older than Jon, but Jon didn't understand why he was there, among those older and more influential men. However, he didn't care. "Well, my lords, you must already know very well why we are here," Jon began in a loud tone. "We are here for business, and I want to know if Myr would like to negotiate and open a connection with our Artican trade company," he said. The first man quickly opened an excited smile. "Of course, King of Artica. We have been expecting your visit since we heard good things from Bravos and Pintos. Despite your conflict with Westeros, you don't seem as aggressive as you were on that continent, and we understand the reason for your fight against the people of the Seven Kingdoms," the man said categorically. "Well, Essos hasn't given me reasons to make enemies, as long as we are treated with respect. There's no reason for conflict," Jon commented with a friendly smile. "But that is great, King of Artica. Please, let's head to my house if that's all right with you. You can bring your guards, and we'll begin negotiating," the man said. Jon didn't sense any malice from him and nodded, but he couldn't help but notice that young man, who didn't even seem to see him as the other magistrates did. His gaze fell toward the ship, staring intently at the scene of Daenerys disembarking at that moment. But Jon didn't care about that. After all, Daenerys was much better than before. Besides her injuries now healed, she dressed well and had made some details in her hair, which she had learned from some Artican women. Putting that aside, while he followed the man with his guard, accompanied by his minister and sister wearing a formal dress with her hair tied up, that teenager had finally taken his eyes off Daenerys and followed the magisters with his guards, not even looking at the Artican group like the other magisters. It seemed like he was part of them, for some reason. Thus, they followed to a luxurious mansion within the city walls, while the people received the Artica group as they did anywhere else, watching with awe and fear, with the giants being the main attraction. As soon as they entered the mansion, they were escorted straight to a spacious room, and, as usual, the meeting began with kindness, praising and flattering Jon Artica regarding his business in Bravos and even in Pintos. Despite Bravos being more surprising, with Jon becoming one of the 12 existing shareholders of the Iron Bank, they now saw him in a different light. After all, he was now on the Iron Bank Council, being one of the 13 in total. Like it or not, he could now influence the loans and interest rates of the Iron Bank, and he was no longer just a great merchant with his products. Jon had more economic influence in Essos than it appeared. It began. The entire negotiation was conducted in the distorted Valyrian of Myr, the official language of this massive city. Like all free cities, it had its own version, though Jon and the other Articans were not fluent in these variations beyond original Valyrian. They could still communicate, and there was also an interpreter to translate any conflicts. The meeting started with a somewhat delicate issue for Myr, as the city had its own business known throughout Essos and Westeros. We know that you also sell many products similar to ours, which is generating competition against us. But we accept this, having nothing else to do, the Magister admitted, while others also commented. However, aside from your fabric, we are interested in all other products, they said. Well, gentlemen, then let's begin, Jon said, and the products were brought by the guards, and the negotiation proceeded. Basically, they stated the prices and made the contract clear, while Jon was accompanied by Arya. Arya was smart, and by this point, she was commenting on a few things, mainly speaking in other languages that their competitors and negotiators couldn't understand, while she tried to offer suggestions on how he should counter their strategies to win, something Jon had requested earlier to gauge her knowledge. Jon nodded, seeing that the experience she had gained in Westeros was beginning to stand out with the men trying to take as much advantage as possible from the Articans. Hey, that idiot keeps staring at me the whole time. Can I hit him with an arrow or dark sister? Arya muttered in the Eastern language, as she noticed that boy constantly looking at her, trying to seduce her. Not that this hadn't happened to Arya before, but this teenager was much worse than any she had ever encountered. Jon sighed, seeing that the guy thought he could conquer any woman, as if he lived a life surrounded by luxury. If he tries to talk to you, punch him and make sure you break his teeth, he responded in the same language, before returning to the negotiation with his men. This reminded him of the arrogant nobles from Westeros before they saw his power. In the end, they merely adjusted the prices to reach a better deal, while Jon distributed a large number of products this time, as he always did on all his trips, for a party in the evening to present them to a larger group, attracting more merchants and seeing their potential. With that, I believe we are done for the first day. I look forward to having the same pleasant conversation tomorrow, Jon said. That's great. I'm sure that after tonight, your products will be extremely popular, the man who appeared to be the leader of the Fat Ones said with a sincere smile. Lady Arya is an excellent negotiator, the young man, who had remained silent the entire time while arrogantly looking at the Artican products, suddenly commented. This caught everyone by surprise, as the compliment had nothing to do with the negotiations. Despite that, Arya had indeed done well. She, who had not liked the young man at all, simply shrugged and did not respond. The boy, however, continued to insist. I would like to talk to you, if possible, Lady Arya. After all, seeing a single young woman so capable is truly surprising. I hope to see you later at the party, he said. Sorry, but I'm not interested, Arya responded in clear Valyrian, leaving the young man a bit flustered. The others looked at him, but no one said anything. Jon decided to step in at this point, wanted to laugh at how Arya handled any suitor. Well, it seems with that we are finished. We'll see you tonight then, for the banquet, Jon said, cutting off the conversation. Wait, the young man called out, and Jon stopped while standing up, watching him speak in a way none of the other Magisters had. Jon couldn't help but raise an eyebrow as the Magisters frowned at the boy's outburst. I saw a girl with white hair on your ship. What's her name? He asked, and this made Jon narrow his eyes as he glanced at the other Magisters, waiting to see their reactions. Everyone was watching, but none of them seemed pleased with the young man's question. The fat man, who was the leader of the group, quickly stood up with a respectful tone. I apologize for this, King of Artica. I haven't introduced him yet. This is a special guest of Myr, Zafir Maerys, O.C., known as the Prince of Lys, as he is the son of the most influential man in the city, Magister Zallan Maerys, with a significant stake in the slave trade. The man began, while the young man seemed quite proud, even looking at Jon with a challenging gaze. unlike the other magisters. Jon wanted to laugh at the boy, clearly a teenager who had no idea who he was dealing with. The fat man continued. He's been in Myr for over a week as a messenger from his father for business, some merchandise, he said, and Jon knew they were talking about slaves. After all, this was a slaver city, and Myr had 3 slaves for every free man. The man continued, trying not to upset anyone with the behavior of this spoiled youth who was nearly ruining their negotiation. It seems he doesn't fully understand what we're discussing. I apologize. I'm sure he didn't mean to be disrespectful, the man said, while the boy looked at the minister, clearly shocked and visibly irritated, as if questioning why he was being belittled in front of Jon. But Jon didn't care about the minister's pleas and turned his attention back to the arrogant boy. Answer me, man from the north. Who is that girl? Tell me her name. After all, I'm interested in buying her for a good price, he insisted, and everyone's eyes darkened at this declaration. Jon stared at him for a moment. The boy was truly spoiled, accustomed to an easy life. But Jon felt like mocking him. As for her, it doesn't matter, and it's best if I don't see you in front of me again, Jon simply said, leaving the boy stunned, unable to believe someone was speaking to him that way. And I hope this won't be a problem. Jon added in a dangerous tone toward the magisters. Please, let us apologize for our guest. They clearly didn't like the tone the young man had used with Jon, and they didn't want to anger a man with 450 ships on their coast. They looked at the boy as if he were a plague they no longer wanted there, realizing he had no idea he was dealing with someone very dangerous. Jon, too, couldn't be bothered with the actions of a spoiled, clueless teenager now. As long as he wasn't seen in front of him again, Jon would deal with him, his father, and Lys when necessary. But if the magisters here didn't keep their word, things wouldn't end well for them by tomorrow. After that, Jon left the room while the young man remained speechless, watching him leave like that. The group returned to the ship, escorted a moment later. Jon had decided not to stay at the mansion. When they returned, they found Daenerys already on the ship, looking quite excited as she spoke with Wind, recounting the things she had seen, while the child of the forest listened attentively, despite being rather upset about not being able to participate. Did you have fun, Aunt? Jon asked as he approached. Yes, it was great, she said cheerfully, while Jon felt satisfied seeing his aunt enjoying the city, saying she had visited several shops and talked to some people, even though she didn't speak Valyrian very well. Well, I'm going to ask you to stay on the ship today. After all, we have a business party to attend tonight, but you'll be well accompanied by your guards. I hope you can understand, Jon requested. That's fine, she nodded. Though she was left behind, she couldn't demand much. All right, let's get ready, Jon said before heading to his room to find his wife, drawing with Ghost. It was something Ygritte had developed as a hobby during this trip, as she often stayed in Jon's cabin, drawing maps to pass the time with her husband without it becoming tedious. How dare they treat me like this? Elsewhere, a young man was far from happy with the Magister's meeting with the king of Artica. The men of Myr had favored the foreigners over him, someone with a superiority complex since birth, nicknamed the Prince of Lys. My prince, an older man, addressing him by his nickname, which was Zafar's demand, tried to reason with the teenager. You can't blame them. What you did wasn't healthy for Myr or even for Lys, he said, knowing the danger Zafar was getting into. After all, he had been hired by Zafar's father to be the young man's advisor, though the boy rarely listened and did whatever he wanted. What? You too? Zafar looked at his father's friend in disbelief. Listen, Zafar. They are a power that defeated Westeros. There are 450 ships. Your father is not happy about you practically starting a war with them. The man nearly pleaded. Nonsense. Those are just rumors. Zafar didn't believe it. It's a big fleet, but Lys can gather and fight against all of them, he declared. The older man couldn't believe what he was hearing. Zafar seemed completely unaware of reality, truly thinking Lys could handle them, consumed by the anger from the humiliation he had suffered, something that had never happened to him before, as he believed himself far superior to them and everyone around him. The Magisters canceled your invitation for tonight, my prince, the man murmured, while the prince once again grew irritated at yet another humiliation. Those bastards, they were flattering me just yesterday while I was buying slaves for them. And now they see me as lesser than that savage from the north. Unacceptable. Do you hear me? Unacceptable, he snarled. I'm lucky I'm sleeping with one of the Magister's wives, so I'll get into that banquet no matter what, and I'll make that savage regret ever crossing me, he declared, while the older man felt lost, watching the young man seemingly about to make the biggest mistake of his life out of pride, and there was nothing he could do except speak his mind. It didn't take long for the hours to pass, and Jon was once again escorted through the city in a heavily reinforced carriage with 100 guards at night. They also had animals to detect any danger, as Jon valued the lives of those accompanying him in the carriage, which included Ygritte, Arya, his minister, and other members of his people. They quickly arrived at the location and were welcomed as they entered the lively banquet hall. They had arrived after everyone else, just as the presentation of the products began. Jon stayed with Ygritte the entire time, dancing with her, while Arya remained with her guards. His minister was busy presenting their products to everyone, and Jon had allowed his guards to remain on site, as he never let his family go without protection. At that moment, someone entered the party, and it was none other than the same young man from earlier. All the Magisters didn't have a friendly expression toward him, as he had been banned. However, due to the fact he was sleeping with one of their wives, he managed to enter with her help, using the excuse that he didn't know about his ban. Jon already knew he would try to enter and was prepared to deal with him on the spot if the boy attempted anything that would seal his fate. He didn't even care as the young man stared at him with a fierce look, and Jon wanted to laugh at the boy's naivety as he drank and drank, trying to talk to people, but no one seemed to like him, though they didn't send him away. He even tried to approach Arya, but he was stopped by the Artican guards, forcing him to retreat. His guards were outnumbered, so he simply stared at Jon with even more anger. Jon sighed and ignored him. It was at that moment that one of the Magisters approached Jon. "King of Artica, you mentioned you were interested in meeting one of Mir's glassmakers, so I invited the one in charge of my factory. Let me introduce you," he said, and Jon nodded. "I'll take a breath of fresh air, Jon," Ygritte said, and Jon nodded, signaling for the guards to accompany his wife, as he was interested in the conversation. It was then that Zafir, a little drunk, took advantage of the moment and approached the Queen of Artica before her guards could reach her as she headed to the balcony. Those who noticed were shocked by his audacity, perplexed by his bold move. "Hello, beautiful woman," he said civilly, startling Ygritte, who looked at him with narrowed eyes. "What do you want?" she growled, clearly displeased with his approach. The Artican guards noticed this and were approaching quickly. Zafir, however, was oblivious to them as he was already drunk and didn't care about anything anymore, focusing solely on his vengeance for the humiliations he had suffered. After all, he was Prince Zafir, son of the great magistrate of Lys, and he wasn't just anyone. Just because the savage had a large number of ships didn't mean he or his men were superior to Zafir and his family. "I just wanted to say that I find you very attractive," he simply said. Zafir had never been rejected in his life, with the power he held in Lys or anywhere else. He could always take any woman to bed and didn't know the meaning of rejection, with his favorite activity being seducing married women. However, this time, things didn't go as expected. Ygritte huffed. "I don't know who you are, but my urge to punch you is immense. So you'd better leave and not follow me." She spoke angrily. After all, she felt offended by being flirted with, especially being a married woman. She had been taken, as her old culture dictated, and she belonged to someone. To her, no man surpassed Jon in this world, and obviously, she would never think of another. She began to walk away, knowing she might end up punching him. Even though Jon wouldn't be mad, she didn't want to cause a scene over a drunk guy. However, as she left, the man didn't seem to accept that. As she walked away, her hand was grabbed, which immediately alerted the Artican guards, and the entire party turned to look at the scene, especially the Magisters, who frowned. As the guards approached, they weren't the first to reach her. Before Ygritte could hit him with a punch, she looked to the side, and the man also noticed someone approaching. When he tried to see who was interfering with his performance to win over the Queen of Artica, he didn't even have time to think. Before he could react, a hand grabbed him by the neck and lifted him in front of everyone. "What are you doing, idiot? I've already lost my patience with you today. Now you're grabbing and bothering my wife," Jon said as the man struggled to breathe, unable to free himself from his grip. The entire party froze at that moment, watching the scene of Jon holding the man by the neck as easily as if he were a rag doll while he writhed. Some of Zafir's guards moved forward, ready to intervene, but the Artican guards drew their swords, making them hesitate for a moment, unsure of what to do. After all, they were vastly outnumbered and terrified of those men, who already had a notorious reputation in the known world. "Wait, King of Artica, we can resolve this. Our guest is clearly drunk, and it was our mistake to let him in." One of the magisters tried to speak. After all, this young man was the son of someone important, and despite the situation, they couldn't let him die in Mir, which would cause problems with Lys over trade. "Why should I? He's been irritating me for a while, and it's time he learns why everyone fears us," Jon said, as the man's face started to turn purple, looking at Jon with fear. "Please, King of Artica. He is the son of the most powerful magistrate in Lys. If you kill him, things will become very difficult between Artica and Lys. Even though Lys would lose in that conflict, I don't think it's wise to kill him just because he's drunk," the magister tried to argue, his voice full of desperation. Jon listened in silence until he simply threw the man against the wall with such force that the sound of bones breaking was audible. The man collapsed unconscious, leaving everyone in shock. "You'd better get him out of this city by tomorrow morning. Otherwise, forget about our deal," Jon said, making it clear that the magister also bore responsibility. "Yes, my lord. It will be done. We apologize for this," the magister said, visibly shaken by the situation, which was highly inconvenient for them. "I'll ask you to stay a bit longer. In the meantime, we're leaving," Jon said to his minister, who nodded. He then gathered Arya and Ygritte and left with most of the guards, leaving only a group of them to escort the minister back as he continued the presentation of the products. He didn't even turn to look at that teenager being dragged away. Jon would still deal with him by the end of the next day. As they were once again heavily escorted back to the ship, Ygritte glanced at him, seeing he was far from happy. "I'm glad I have you to protect me, my husband," she smiled, feeling grateful that Jon had come to her aid, and also feeling a rush of desire for him in that moment. However, she could see that he wasn't finished with that foolish drunk. "What will you do with him?" Ygritte asked. She knew her husband wouldn't just let the situation go. "Well, that guy seems to have no sense of the world. But I'll make it very clear to him what happens when someone disrespects the king of a nation," Jon said with a dangerous tone. "I may not kill him, but I'll personally take him to his father, or at least part of him," he said, and then they returned to the ship. Zafir woke up with a pained tone. "What is this? What happened to me?" he quickly exclaimed as he tried to move, but the intense pain wouldn't let him do anything. "Prince Zafir," his advisor approached at that moment, looking worried. "Can you tell me what happened to me?" Zafir exclaimed, clearly unhappy about the situation. "It seems like you don't remember anything, but it was the Artican king. You have 2 broken ribs, your right arm, and your shoulder is also dislocated." He spoke cautiously. "This?" Zafir exclaimed as his memories started coming back, looking seriously at his advisor. Even though his memories were blurred due to his drunkenness, he still remembered being grabbed by that man, who had a look of rage, and being thrown far away before everything went dark. "That savage did this to me," Zafir growled in pure rage, so much so that he already wanted Jon dead for the humiliation. "My prince, don't act rashly. We are in a very bad position in this city." The advisor tried to inject some reason into Zafir. "Like what?" "I am the Prince of Zafir," Zafir exclaimed. "You try to make advances on a queen from another kingdom, openly, at a party. Lys has become a city in a diplomatic crisis with the Articans at this moment. You shouldn't have done that, and your father won't be pleased to hear about this," the man said with a tone more severe than usual. The son of the great magister of Lys had just brought a conflict upon Lys that it didn't ask for. "What are you saying?" "My father will support me in this. He always will, whether it's the Articans or even this free city. They will all pay." Zafir growled with so much rage that he couldn't see anything beyond revenge. Be careful with your words, my prince. The situation with Mir isn't good either. The Artican king brought proof that you were sleeping with one of the Magister's women. He got hold of one of your letters, I don't know how, but now they're isolating us from the city. They aren't even sending a healer, and they want you out of the city by the end of the day. The man spoke with frustration. This spoiled brat had just ruined Lys's relationship with Mirswell. He could already imagine his father not being happy about this, and even he might be punished for it, most likely with his head chopped off. He did what? Zafir couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jon had become so enraged that even this fury extended to Zafir's accomplices who had let him go to the party right after getting off the boat, letting chaos reign against that man. No, I will have my revenge. He hadn't given up on his vengeance. Either way, let's leave. Our men are already preparing our ship. We need to set sail before the Artican fleet departs tomorrow, for what I've heard. I don't want to deal with them at sea after you enrage their king by trying to seduce his queen. The advisor said to Zafir. We can deal with him, Zafir stubbornly declared, but what he didn't expect next was a slap, hitting him across the face. Can you wake up for once, you idiot? The advisor exclaimed angrily this time, while Zafir, stunned, stared at him before he continued. They have a damn fleet with 450 ships. Tell me, you fool, what will happen to us if they find us at sea? He tried to inject some sense into this idiot. What he had just done would have him lose his hand, especially with how vengeful Zafir was, but he knew he would be executed as soon as Zafir's father learned of the situation. Get out of here now! Zafir screamed with so much anger that he even wanted to execute him, but it wouldn't be smart until they were at sea. The advisor simply nodded and left. Zafir saw this and began shouting in the room, furious at everything that was happening, while grabbing his only hand and spotting a piece of paper and a quill with ink beside the bed. He started writing something on it. Guards, he called, and his father's men approached. I want you to do this for me. Find any group in this city that can do it. Understood? He said, showing the paper, while the man nodded, unable to say anything more, realizing that the prince didn't even want his advisor to know. Meanwhile, Jon was preparing for another day of negotiations with the Magisters. Come on, Arya, it's time to finish this negotiation. And you, take good care of her. Jon turned to his guards, as Daenerys also prepared to go into the city. Both groups were to remain while Ygritte stayed on the ship, drawing alongside Wind, who had also begun sketching after seeing the Queen's creations. Daenerys, once again, wandered the streets as she visited the markets, as she had always wanted to do, wondering how her mother would have felt being there, as she had always heard from Viserys that her mother had longed to be in this place. She was accompanied by 6 royal Artican guards to attend to her needs during her stay, as well as to keep her safe. She couldn't help but appear like a naive girl, freely wandering while she saw various types of goods being sold in the city, with merchants shouting their products and prices, without caring how much she spent. After all, her nephew always gave her enough money to buy whatever she wanted, with plenty to spare. She felt a bit hesitant about spending Jon's money, but he always said something like, I'm so rich that you can spend whatever you want. It won't even make a dent in my savings. Of course, Jon used his own money, already starting to separate the kingdom's gold from that of his family. He didn't want Artica to find itself in a situation like Westeros, where the king uses tax money for personal benefits, mostly spent on carnal pleasures. With Daenerys, this was how the entire day passed. She met people, and when she tried to speak in her somewhat broken Valyrian, she would talk about the goods until deciding to buy something. She even had help from the guards and the local people of Myr, who also tended to speak the common tongue due to the presence of foreigners from Westeros and other regions that maintain the common tongue. Myr was famous for its fabrics and glassworks. There was also great respect from everyone she spoke to. After all, she was surrounded by Articans, and by now, their reputation was well known. No one dared to challenge such a group, and they knew that Daenerys was important in some way to have so many men in finely crafted armor guarding her life at all times. Everything seemed like any other normal day, with one of the guards already carrying many of the things she had purchased. It was almost late afternoon, and she wanted to see the sunset from one of the city's spots she had noticed the day before. "Hey, can we go to that square from yesterday?" Daenerys asked, and the royal guard nodded. "Yes, you can go as you please. We will protect you, princess," he told the others as she nodded happily. "Let's go," she said, walking ahead until she turned down one of the streets. Walking a certain distance until she suddenly stopped, noticing that the street seemed eerily quiet, with no one around, which was strange. The men following her also noticed the oddness. Then, in the space above them, a raven began to cry. They immediately understood that one of their wards on the ship was signaling danger. Quickly, they drew their swords. Daenerys was surprised and scared, wondering what was happening, as there was still no one in sight on the street. But then, footsteps began to echo from both sides, and people started to emerge. Both ends of the street were suddenly surrounded by a group of men dressed like mercenaries, wearing leather clothing. "Finally, we've managed to trap you in one of our ambushes scattered across the city. We thought you wouldn't fall for it anymore," one of the men in the group said. "Who are you, and what are your intentions? Do you have any idea of the consequences of messing with someone from Artica?" The royal guard growled at the man. "Well, I know you're a dangerous group, but before you can actually do anything, we'll already be far from this city, and you all will be dead. After all, we only need the girl." He spoke, and quickly all the mercenaries drew their swords, preparing to fight. "I want you to stay by her side the whole time, while 3 of you cover the south, and I, along with another, will protect the north. Don't let them get near the princess, understood?" The leader commanded as they swiftly positioned themselves to fight, even though it was only 5 of them against about 30 men. 11 of the enemies surrounded Daenerys. "Yes, sir," the other 5 responded to their leader. "Come on, attack," the mercenary yelled, and quickly the group charged from both sides, while the Articans waited. In an instant, a fierce battle broke out as swords clashed. But in the next moment, the Articans began to move through the enemy ranks, cutting down their opponents with just 2 swift motions, immediately moving on to the next attacker. Daenerys was truly frightened by it all. Chaos surrounded her, with men shouting and blades clashing against one another. Even her thoughts were in disarray, wondering if King Robert had discovered her location and sent assassins after her. But the situation seemed far more complicated than she could have imagined. "Just a bunch of fools. Don't worry, princess. We'll handle this before you even notice." Beside her, the Artican guard said, standing to protect her as he watched more and more mercenaries fall. The enemies, who had been confident earlier, began to see their men die in droves. Dozens of them lay dead all around. While not a single Artican had fallen, their finely made armor, sharp and light blades, proving far superior in cutting down their enemies. After all, what was a mercenary compared to a royal Artican guard, equipped with the best gear in the world and years of training in Artica under all kinds of circumstances? Realizing they wouldn't win, the mercenaries started to flee in fear. However, it was already too late, even for those who tried to escape. As they ran, the Artican soldiers paused their attacks for a moment, watching at least 10 men fleeing in all directions. But then, they were surprised by animals emerging from the streets, attacking through the openings in the fugitives' armor. The mercenaries screamed in terror, not understanding what was happening, until their cries were finally silenced. Quickly, all 10 were brutally killed. The animals, with fresh blood still on their bodies, retreated once again, as if they had been controlled for a moment, and in the next second, everything returned to normal, as if they hadn't just transformed into bloodthirsty beasts. "Are you all right, princess?" the Artican guard asked as Daenerys finally snapped out of her shock. She was trembling slightly, looking at the fallen men on the ground, their bodies severed while they screamed. "I'm fine, it's just," she murmured, unable to finish. The leader of the royal guard approached and, coldly, ordered, "Silence them all." He spoke, and quickly his men began to decapitate the bodies until the street fell into complete silence. Daenerys still appeared quite shaken. "I apologize for this, my princess, but I ended up staining your new clothes with blood," a royal guard murmured, noticing that the luggage they had set aside at the beginning of the fight was now splattered with enemy blood. It's fine, she murmured, not knowing what else to say, feeling some fear. There's nothing else to do here. Take her to the ship. Our king should be on his way by now. I'll stay behind and explain the situation to the city guard, he said. Yes, he acted. The royal guards responded, and they all began escorting Daenerys back. Jon had left the negotiations halfway through, furious at the audacity of that prince. He soon learned that the prince had hired a small mercenary gang in the city to try to capture Daenerys. The fool had not only tried this with Arya and Ygritte before, but now even Daenerys, who had caught his attention from the very first day. Jon, with his cold fury that only surfaced when something truly infuriated him, eliminated the entire gang. He quickly discovered their hideout and sent hundreds of animals there, taking more than 50 lives. He took the prince's letter and asked a bird to carry it to his ship. Jon arrived at his ship and spoke briefly with his wife and Arya before entering Daenerys' cabin. He quickly saw his aunt crying on the bed. "I'm sorry, Aunt," he said, approaching and sitting beside her, while the girl was still visibly shaken, trembling after witnessing so much blood and death. Was it King Robert?" she murmured. "No, it wasn't him. He probably doesn't even know you're with us. But don't worry, whoever did this will pay dearly." Jon spoke in a dangerous tone, while she nestled into his embrace, crying into his chest. Jon, in turn, stroked her head and stared seriously out one of Daenerys' windows at the setting sun. Out at sea, a ship sailed away from Myr. It was the ship of the Prince of Lys, who had already left the city a few hours earlier. The man was thinking about the girl who interested him more than any other prostitute he had ever seen in Lys. After all, the city had many Valyrian descendants, but seeing someone as beautiful as Daenerys, without knowing her true identity, had caught his attention. He imagined how she was being captured and planned his revenge for what had happened in the city of Myr. However, he did not know that he wasn't alone in that room, while a few men stood outside. From before he boarded, a small eagle, hidden the entire time, had been placed by Jon to listen to what the prince said and to act if necessary. But now, Jon would use it in another way. The prince was startled when, suddenly, the same eagle flew out from under the bed and landed on the headboard, staring at him intently. "What is this?" he murmured. In the next moment, the eagle spread its wings and flew at him. Startled, he tried to use his only healthy hand to grab it, but the bird swiftly dodged, flapping its wings in his face. He began to scream in pain as its talons slashed across his skin. The door burst open moments later with the screams, and the Myr soldiers saw their prince being mauled by the eagle's claws, which were digging into various parts of his face. It was a scene of pure terror, and they rushed to act. To the south of this ship, 3 Artican ships were anchored in the sea, carrying out Jon's orders to capture the Prince of Lys' ship and bring the man, known as the Prince of Lys, to the king. After all, that teenager had a debt to Jon after the banquet. Terror had struck the Prince of Lys. Back in the city, the next day Jon returned to negotiate. The Magisters were shocked at what had happened to the gang that had tried to attack Jon, especially after realizing that all who had targeted Daenerys were dead, a fact that sent chills down their spines. Yet, none of them complained as the negotiations concluded that day. Daenerys couldn't leave her room, and Jon wasn't happy about it. He had finally managed to make some progress with her, but it all ended in an even more difficult situation for the young woman. Thus, they returned to the ship at the end of the 3rd day, leaving Lys with all the contracts signed. The Magister, whom Jon had warned about his wife's betrayal, instead of being furious, thanked the Artican king. He isolated his wife and stripped her of her titles, leaving her in a very bad situation after the end of their marriage. It didn't take long for Jon's ships to find the fleet. The 3 ships that had attacked the Lys ship were now alongside it, waiting for the return of the king, with the captured ship tethered to them. "Well, I want you to prepare all the ships for our departure to the next city. In the meantime, let me go talk to that guy," Jon said as he made his way toward the Lys ship, accompanied by his guards. The men who had survived the fight with the Articans, which had been a one-sided massacre with no surprises, were now prisoners. Jon noticed the man who was likely the prince's advisor watching in fear, but he didn't care and proceeded to the largest room, where the Prince of Lys was expected to be. How is he? Jon asked as an Artican guard, who happened to be a dwarf, stood watch. He's locked up, my king. The idiot keeps crying nonstop. You really turned him into something else, the dwarf replied with a grumble, looking at Jon with fear after hearing what had happened. Jon shrugged, and upon entering the room, he found the Prince of Lys crying, his face covered in cuts. His wounds had been treated slightly, but fresh blood still trickled, and those cuts would leave him with many scars. One of his eyes was missing, as the eagle's talons had managed to tear it out. Well, it seems you can no longer think of yourself as handsome as you once were, can you, Prince of Lys? Jon said, approaching with a smile that almost seemed cruel, noticing the body of the eagle they had managed to kill in a corner. But the damage had already been done. The prince immediately froze, stopping his crying as he began to tremble. He finally started to grasp the reality of his situation, and the hatred he had once felt for Jon was replaced by fear. I doubt you'll be able to charm any woman now, but I'm not satisfied with just that. Drunk or not, I will not allow anyone to try and flirt with my wife. You must think I'm a fool, doing this even when I was present. To make it worse, you didn't learn your lesson and even try to kidnap my aunt. It's hard to find an idiot like you, it really is. But one thing I'm sure of, your end will be far from enviable, Jon murmured, while the prince, now with only one eye, looked at him trembling, finding no remorse or pity in Jon's gaze. Your face might have been marked by the men you sent after Daenerys, but what I'm about to do is something I planned since yesterday, when I saw you trying to approach my wife, Jon said in the same tone, as there were 3 ships waiting further south for one specific reason. Don't worry, I'll deliver you to your father, but not before taking care of one last thing. After all, since your father didn't teach you, it's time to show you how the world can educate you, Jon said, drawing his katana from its sheath. Did you know that this pure Valyrian steel is worth more money than everything you've ever spent in your life? So feel privileged. At least, you'll have the honor of feeling such valuable steel on your skin, Jon said calmly, with a dangerous tone, as the prince began to realize where this was heading. Either way, this will help you think twice in the future before getting into a similar situation or even when you try to sleep with a woman again. Jon continued, and in the next moment, he began to move his weapon toward the prince's body, stopping at a specific point. I'll be castrating you, Jon said, as his weapon was pointed between the prince's legs. And, in the next moment, before the prince could say anything with his mouth full of cuts, Jon moved his sword and made the cut, removing the prince's organ. Release them, Jon said as his men began to untie all the Lys soldiers. They started to be freed, still looking with fear at the Arctic group. What will happen to us? A middle-aged man spoke at that moment with some fear toward the Arctic king. You will return to Lys, take your prince back to his father, or part of him. Also let him know that if Lys still wants a trade deal, they will have to come to us, but if this happens and your father wants revenge against any Arctic man, we will attack Lys. Can you understand that? Jon gave a warning in a threatening tone. Why yes, King of Artica, we will do exactly that. The man murmured with clear fear, and Jon nodded before turning back to his men. Now we go south. We have to visit other cities and let them return on their own, Jon said as his men began to move. He looked one last time at the men from Lys. You don't need to worry about pirates after the news of our fleet in the sea. They all started hiding like flies, so the sea is safer now. Jon informed them before heading to the fleet ship and setting course for the flagship. Without choice, the Lys counselor could only watch the Arcticans starting to prepare as they began to pull away from them, leaving them behind, being much faster. He then headed into his ship, seeing a scene that made him tremble as the once arrogant young man was now a man screaming and crying. The fleet began descending over the next few days as Jon tried to visit his aunt and asked Arya to try to cheer her up along with Wind. Little by little, the girl started to regain some spirit, beginning to come out of her room again. Jon couldn't blame her for her small depression. She wasn't used to seeing blood, and that must have reminded her of many of her insecurities as she began seeking him out again. Tyrosh wasn't far away as they took only a few days to reach the city. At the same time, the Arctic ships with the Minister of Foreign Affairs finally began disembarking at the port of Dorne. "We're back here, finally," Darius murmured as he had full authority to command the entire group, except for the royal guards who only took orders from the royal family. But Jon had been clear to act in the best way possible to protect all of his men, even in a land where Artica didn't have a good relationship with the Martell family after recent events. "We are ready, Minister." A royal guard approached the man. "Great, let's go," Darius said as they began to depart. As soon as they left, several guards were waiting behind a young woman and man as they descended the plank to meet them. "Welcome back to Dorne, Arctic gentlemen. We have met before." Arctic Minister Darius, Arya Martell, greeted them alongside her brother at their father's request. "It's good to see you again, heir of Dorne," Arya Martell, Darius greeted in a diplomatic tone. "Let's head to Sunspear. My father is expecting you, though his condition isn't in his favor, which is why he didn't come to greet you, as you know," she said, and Darius nodded as they began to head towards the city, making their way to the Martell fortress. Once they entered the property, they were escorted inside to meet the head of House Martell and other nobles interested in Arctic products. As they continued walking through the corridors with some Arctic guards alongside the minister, another part of the guards remained in the courtyard. It was in one of these corridors, as they entered a larger room, that they came across Prince Oberyn, watching the Arcticans from a corner with some interest. Darius and the royal guards narrowed their eyes at this individual, noticing how he looked at them after everything that had happened. Oberyn, however, did nothing, merely smiled at the group with a somewhat mocking look. Darius noticed this, but soon continued with the Arctic group, as Doran's children didn't seem to appreciate the scene. They tried to guide the Arcticans towards the main hall, where Prince Doran Martell was waiting for them. Oberyn would not participate in the meeting by order of his brother, so the Arcticans didn't insist on that man and proceeded inside. They found Doran sitting in his chair, as always, when they entered the room where Doran, his youngest son, and some nobles were waiting for them. "Prince Doran Martell," Darius spoke calmly, looking with interest at the man in front of him. "It's good to see you here again, Minister Darius. I hope your journey has been pleasant," Doran said, while Arianne and his other son joined the meeting at his side. The conversation began, and Doran started discussing their agreements and the current diplomatic relations between Dorne and Artica, which were nearing a crisis after recent events. So much so that there were no more Arctican ships bringing new supplies of their product, something of great interest to Dorne, especially when the ice had provided them with a pleasure they had never experienced before. During the discussion, a strange bird, which had come on the Arctican ships, began circling the castle. Meanwhile, Jon was trying to look for Nyra as they approached Tyrosh, but he noticed something strange. The girl was not in her usual room. The room was abandoned, full of missing items, and Jon found it odd, starting to search other open chambers. However, he couldn't find her because Nyra had been taken away, hidden from his eyes in the sky. Doran already knew of Jon's abilities and didn't want him to see her, so he hid her in a closed room within the castle, almost like a prison. The girl was trapped, just staring at the ceiling, her belly very large with pregnancy. Nyra remained in that room, only receiving food. She was frustrated, feeling the situation was worse than she had imagined. Every day, she wondered when the Arcticans would arrive and if she would have a chance to see them. After all, she wanted to disobey her uncle's orders and make contact with Jon, or at least inform him about the fact that she was expecting his child, especially now, as it had been almost 9 months since he had left Dorne, and soon she would have to give birth. Nyra was frustrated and began to realize that her mother's family wasn't as welcoming as she had thought. She started to question whether Doran truly saw her as a niece or just as a political tool. After all, she and even her child, whom she didn't want at all, wishing, even at the last moment, that he would be given to his father, knowing that Jon would care for the baby, were now being used as pawns in a political game. This was especially true as Doran's plans to marry her off to Viserys seemed to be falling apart. For some reason, in the past few months, Doran had lost contact with the one who was with the Targaryens, who always remained secretive, without revealing the identity or location of Nyra's two uncles. Nyra didn't believe that Jon would fall into Doran's plans, that he intended to make her and their child his official heirs, so she could become queen or even use their child to become the king of Westeros in the future. Something very hard to believe, yet not impossible. She stayed there for several more hours while the Arcticans continued discussing with Doran until they reached an agreement where both sides would start to make peace. Trade between Dorne and Artica would resume, and Dorne would try to offer tax incentives as a way for the Martell family to redeem itself for the confusion with the Arcticans. Doran wanted to speak with Jon personally, and the minister said he would pass the message on to his king. Then, they began to return to the ship, refusing to stay in Sunspear. As they were removing their luggage and equipment from the courtyard to return to the ship, without anyone noticing, a snake slipped out from between the crates, slithering through some holes in the main courtyard and sneaking into Sunspear. Jon was already not at all pleased to see that Doran had hidden Nyra from him, and he quickly began to follow the snake, which was an animal he had sent as a plan B. It slithered through the secret passages of Sunspear, searching for the girl. But it wasn't easy, even as Jon had locked himself in his room with Ygritte, while his ship was already nearing Tyrosh to focus on finding where she was. Hours later, he finally found a location with an unusual amount of security. After all, there were 4 men at the door, and there didn't seem to be any passage or window in the area. The snake slithered past the men through the cracks beneath some wooden decorations on the floor. It quickly tried to circle the room until, after some time, it finally found a very small gap between the corridor and the room in a difficult-to-reach spot. Jon knew he could only control animals that were within a few kilometers of him, creating a connection with them. He couldn't simply control multiple animals hundreds of kilometers away. So, he had prepared that snake before Darius left. He also knew Doran must have been well prepared for this. Almost all the rats in the castle had been killed, or even insects, as the Martells had placed insecticide in various parts of the location. Jon even found some traps set for the snake and couldn't help but admire Doran's cunning. However, he managed to bypass them and finally entered through the gap, bringing the snake into the room. The room was filled with candles, with an occupied bed, some books on the bedside table, and the area where the person ate. There on the bed was a girl with young, feminine legs, and when Jon raised the snake's head to look, seeing that it was indeed Nyra, he was shocked, practically feeling the ground give way beneath him. Nyra, still staring at the ceiling, quickly sensed something strange in her room. She lifted her head swiftly, looking at the snake frozen in one of the corners. Her first instinct was to scream, afraid that it might harm her and her baby, but she held back the effort. After catching her breath for a moment, she realized something was off and stared at the snake with suspicion. First wondering how a snake could have gotten in, and now the snake remained motionless, as if paralyzed, staring from afar, seemingly frightened. "Jon," Nyra murmured, quickly following her instincts, thinking it might finally be Jon, the Arctic king she didn't know how, but had loved since the moment she saw him. "Jon, is that you?" She spoke again, still looking hopefully at the snake, hoping it was truly her love, speaking softly so as not to be overheard by the guards. Seeing the snake still motionless without even taking its eyes off her, she became convinced it was Jon. "Jon, listen, if you're there, please, get me out of here," Nyra pleaded immediately, looking at him with tears. She was already convinced she couldn't stay there any longer. Her instincts were to save her baby. Her uncle Oberyn didn't seem to want to harm the child. He genuinely cared for Nyra, but she didn't like how Arianne looked at her, with a glint of jealousy in her eyes, and she was very afraid that she might harm her son, even though they had grown up together. She had seen her cousin do some rather despicable things. She looked at Jon with pleading eyes as she touched her belly. "I carry our child, and, I don't want him to be used like I was, as a political tool. I don't even care if you need to make me one of your wives, just—" She murmured, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I just ask that you take care of him and don't let him become a bastard. We can annul the marriage later, and I can return to Dorne if your wives don't accept this. Just don't leave him here and give him a worthy life." She whispered, asking that snake something that was hard for her. Nyra finally stopped as she stared at the snake. She could see that her words had some effect. The snake seemed to move as if agreeing with her words and started to leave, slithering through the hidden hole in the wall, while Naira just watched it, lying back on the bed, wiping her tears, staring at the ceiling, dimly lit by the candles. "Please, come and get me. At least give this child a future," she murmured, hoping Jon would come, thinking about her child as a loving mother would. "Jon! Jon! Jon!" Jon's name was called out several times while he lay in bed, when the person calling him began to shake him. He snapped out of his trance, and his gaze fell on his wife, Ygritte, who stood beside the bed, her eyes filled with fear. "Jon, what happened to you? You suddenly became hot. What does that look? What did you see?" Ygritte asked, a bit worried. After all, it was rare to see her husband with such a shocked expression. Jon just sighed, closed his eyes, and then sat up on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Ygritte walked around the bed and came closer, her worried gaze never leaving him. "Jon, talk to me. What's going on?" she murmured, trying to comfort her husband as a concerned wife. I'm going to have a child." That was all Jon murmured. "What do you mean by that? Is Serena pregnant?" Ygritte asked, somewhat shocked. "No." Jon didn't know how to explain it. Rhaenys is about to give birth," he said weakly, still processing it in his mind. "Is this for real?" Ygritte was now even more shocked. She understood why Jon was acting like this. "Yes. I need to think about it," Jon murmured. "This is really hard to believe. How will you deal with this?" Ygritte asked, her eyes still on him, her arm resting on his shoulder. "I don't know yet. This is so confusing. She doesn't even know who I am." Jon murmured, "Look, I know this is complicated, but I saw the way you two looked at each other. Take her," she said simply. "What? Just like that? You're not upset about this?" I asked, surprised at Ygritte, knowing she was tougher than Serena when it came to accepting something like this. "Well, I can't help but feel jealous of you, you rogue wolf. But when I decided to marry you, I knew I wasn't even your first wife. Our agreement is that you don't sleep with prostitutes or women we don't agree upon. What happened in Dorne between you and that woman, Serena, and I knew it would happen the moment we saw you both looking at each other. I just wish I had that look from you sometimes," she said, murmuring at the end almost like a love-struck teenager. "Thank you for that," Jon said in the end with a sigh and kissed Ygritte. "But it doesn't matter now," Jon concluded, trying to be rational. After all, he was the king of a nation. He had time to resolve this. "Thinking about it now won't solve anything. Let's finish our deal in Tyrosh," he concluded, his eyes becoming more resolute. "After that, I intend to invade Dorne. I will remove Rhaenys from Doran's grasp." Jon lay in bed with Ygritte sleeping naked beside him, but he couldn't help but rethink about Naira. The Targaryen family had always married among themselves to have descendants, but what worried him slightly was what Naira would say when she found out his true identity. Would she hate him for being Lyanna Stark's son? Jon couldn't stop thinking about it. After all, she was his relative, his blood as well, and that worried him even more. They had an undeniable connection, and the issue seemed to weigh heavily on him. Finally, the ship arrived in Tyrosh a day later. The city welcomed them quickly, as the local magistrates already knew about some of the things that had happened in Myr. They were a bit concerned, but still received them with ease, avoiding offending Jon in any way after hearing what had occurred in the other city. The negotiations didn't take long. It only took 2 days to settle all the contracts, and Jon had no problems with them. He met some of the city's magisters without major complications, but he was in a hurry and didn't want to get too involved. Arya handled the negotiations with him, while Daenerys no longer had the courage to enter the city. Jon simply left on the last day, heading back south and beginning to cross the Stepstones, where he would meet up with his men after passing through the islands. He was already planning how to invade Sunspear, not caring if he had to break every trade contract he had with Dorne. After all, one thing was clear. Doran was trying to use his child with Naira to gain political power over him, and Jon would not let that happen under any circumstances. He would show the Martells what happens when someone messes with his family in this way. Doran still had some credit with Jon after what happened during his journey. Despite being manipulative, the man had tried to stabilize their relationship, and had even thought of Nyra before. But after seeing Nyra imprisoned, hidden from him, that changed everything, and nothing would stop Jon from attacking Dorne now.